the meeting at 6:35 p.m. I've just finished the declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest, and I'll move, if there's no further declarations, I'll move through to the confirmation of the previous minutes from the Public Voice Committee the 1st of December, the Briefing Committee the 1st of December, and the minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting on the 8th of December. Do I have a mover? Councillor Clausen, do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, I'll declare that motion carried unanimously. Councillors, there are several Lord Mayoral minutes. The first one I'd like to commend to you is quite topical. It is on the success of our inaugural new annual cultural festival, and I think it's very timely. The festival obviously finished only a few days ago. It notes that our inaugural 10-day cultural festival, New Annual, was held across the city between the 12th and the 21st of February. It attracted over 30,000 people, cementing Newcastle's status as a hub of creativity and culture. Acknowledges more than 500 artists and 250 staff, crew and volunteers were involved in the delivery of the New Annual, ensuring the festival delivered a strong economic boost to the local arts sector, and that the festival was proud to collaborate with several existing events and festival, including the Newcastle Writers' Festival, This Is Not Art Festival, Big Picture Fest, Olive Tree Market and Micro Theatre Festival. Notes more than 28 ticketed COVID-safe sessions and hands-on workshops were sold out or at capacity during the New Annual. Acknowledges that New Annual drew visitors from the surrounding regions around the state and further afield, including Queensland and Victoria. Also notes initial data that we've just received indicates New Annual coincided with improved vacancy rates among local accommodation providers, with initial figures from the Australian Accommodation Monitor reports showing a 13% rise in bookings and a 37% jump in accommodation revenues during the first Friday and Saturday night of the New Annual when compared to the corresponding period last year, noting that was prior to COVID restrictions being implemented across New South Wales and the country. I think it's important as a council, given this was our collective initiative, congratulate our amazing local artists for embracing New Annual and helping the city to create a truly world-class arts and cultural festival for Novocastrians and our visitors. I think it's worthwhile, given this has been several years of dedicated work, to also thank our wonderful staff, particularly our major events and corporate affairs team, led by Kathleen Hyland, and in particular the New Annual project manager, Kate Britton, for their work to deliver such a successful festival. And also noting that we're planning to do it all again in a little over 6 months' time, returning to the original ongoing dates from the 24th of September to the 3rd of October 2021. I commend the motion to councillors and open up for discussion. Councillor Duncan.
Lord Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to speak in support of the Lord Mayoral minute for the New Annual. I think this has been an extraordinary event and an extraordinary achievement in a incredibly difficult time, and one that nobody saw coming. Major planning for the New Annual had really only just commenced once the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden everything was placed on hold. The public health orders meant that there were no events, there were no venues open, there were no gatherings outside our homes. And I think the uncertainty of that past 12 months has culminated in somehow the staff involved under Kate Britton and Kathleen Hyland to deliver a truly first-class event that is just, I think, shows enormous promise for the future, and I really look forward to seeing the next New Annual coming up in September. I'd also like to comment that I think the fact that we as a city chose to continue to support this festival in such a very difficult time and such an uncertain time is to be commended. Our arts industry and our artists and creatives locally were amongst some of those most horribly affected economically, financially by the pandemic. There were masses of jobs lost and opportunities lost as they were no longer able to perform in our venues, hotels and festivals and things all came to a screaming halt. It's sobering to think that just one COVID super spreader event could have brought that all undone. It could have stopped all of it. So I just wanted to speak in support of that Lord Mayoral minute, Lord Mayor, and add my hearty congratulations and gratitude to the team for pulling off something so very special.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Church.
Lord Mayor, thank you very much for this Lord Mayoral Minute. I too support this festival, and I think at this important time post-COVID, it's great to see an injection into our creative arts and performance community who've certainly done it hard during this time. But as you would expect, I sometimes take a fairly hard look at finances. My understanding is that this event cost Council around $1 million. Which was our contribution. It would be useful, I think, for councillors if we could perhaps ask a question on notice. The kind of cost-benefit analysis that might be available to us to see the kinds of returns that an event like this produces. In particular, it'd be handy to note the amount of revenue from ticket sales, and of course, you've mentioned already the impact on accommodation. But I think the city is big enough and mature enough to be hosting an arts and cultural festival. This is a great start, but I always think we need to seek value for money, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further discussion, councillors? If there's no further discussion, I would just like to again thank councillors for their support when we first discussed this idea through a minute in 2018, and to see a couple of years later for our inaugural festival to be such a wonderful success. I think it's really important to acknowledge the many, many hours of hard work that have been put in by our team here at Council to ensure the festival was a success for our city. It isn't easy pulling all those groups together and making sure we are working collaboratively in that space. And I also acknowledge the support of the New South Wales Government, who granted up to about $90,000 in grants. And I note the attendance of the Minister for the Arts at the opening event, who was very enthusiastic about Newcastle putting all its festivals together at one time of the year, and committed verbally at that opening to increasing the New South Wales Government support for the next festival, which I think is will be of great benefit to the City of Newcastle. And again, I'd just like to thank you, councillors. I know that over the previous 10 days of the festival, I saw you at a lot of the events supporting our local artists. So it does take a village, and I really appreciated that, and I know they appreciated seeing you as councillors at all the events as well. I commend the motion to you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare the motion carried unanimously. Councillors, the second minute is putting a submission in for the Local Government Remuneration Tribunal and the annual determination submission for 2021. It's actually due before our next council meeting, so I thought we've received correspondence from the New South Wales Local Government Remuneration Tribunal calling for submissions by the 19th of March. I think it's important that we continue our advocacy in our submission regarding the clarification of our status as a city, either metropolitan or regional, noting that while we're classified in this particular state government document as a major regional city, the Newcastle local government area is often exempt from both regional and metropolitan grant funding due to inconsistencies in classification. Again, advocate for the creation of a new categorisation for the City of Newcastle as a gateway city, recognising the immense importance of Greater Newcastle to the broader economy of New South Wales. Gateway cities play a critical role in the future economic resilience and competitive opportunities of the state, particularly with the ongoing impacts of COVID-19. A gateway city classification would improve the efficiency and value for money of New South Wales government grants. The City of Newcastle is significantly disadvantaged in both its eligibility and access to a large number of New South Wales government grant programs. Again, noting that the Independent Hunter Research Foundation has identified government grant funding sources totalling $5.86 billion, where the City of Newcastle has been deemed ineligible to access funding due to our classification. If Newcastle's share of these funds was in line with its share of gross state product in 2019, the region might have received or be receiving an extra $170.4 million in vital grant funding. Supporting the Gateway City classification in Transport for New South Wales Future Transport Strategy 2056, which recognises the City of Newcastle emergence as a global gateway city, while the New South Wales Government's Greater Metropolitan Plan 2036 recognises the entire city of the LGA as metropolitan. Also noting that superannuation for all councillors and mayors in New South Wales, supporting a unanimous motion from Lake Macquarie City Council, who've been advocating for the superannuation guarantee to be extended to elected local government representatives because the current situation is discriminatory and out of step with community expectations. In Queensland and Victoria, mayors and councillors are paid appropriate superannuation entitlements, and the City of Newcastle believes it's time to stop that discrimination against mayors and elected councillors in New South Wales. I'll commend the motion to councillors and open it up for discussion. Councillor Rufo.
Lord Mayor, thank you. I was wondering if we're able to vote in seriatim on these items, particularly in point 2, the 3 different points that fall under point 2.
So you would just have in seriatim 1, 2 and the first point together?
So point 1, then point 2, point 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3.
Yeah, that's a procedure. I can take it as a procedural motion.
Sorry? So
Can I help?
You have a point of clarification, councillor.
Possibly point 1, 2, the 3 points in point 2 aren't lettered, but let's say they were A, B, C.
Yep.
I think it might help if we were to vote for paragraph 1, paragraph 2, A and B all together. Is that okay?
Yes.
And then C regarding discrimination as a separate item.
Yeah, that's a
really the
procedural
point, I
motion,
think.
so I'll take it as
Moving on, I'm happy to second it.
procedural motion that's moved and seconded, that we vote in seriatim with points 1, 2, A and B as the first item and point C as the second item. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against, I declare that motion carried. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I'll put the motion, which will be voted on in 2 parts, part 1 to A and B, and then C. So I'll put 1, 2, A and B. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against, there's no votes against. I declare that carried unanimously. Oh, you can see on the screen, point C, 2C is separated. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor McKenzie, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Winnie Barts, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. All those against, please stand. Councillor Church, Councillor Rufo, Councillor Luke. I declare that motion carried. I really wanted to count the extra vote and really appreciate the support. So thank you. And I hope you're paying them super. You're paying them super? Good. Okay.
Everyone should get super.
Good. Fair enough. Yes, we do appreciate the support. Our councillors, I just wanted to take the opportunity. We normally do this on an annual basis, and I would have to say, in speaking to a City of Newcastle budget submission for 2021-22 to both state and federal governments, that the City of Newcastle has been leading the way in local government in terms of making formal submissions for very important projects, both in their remit and of importance to the region, in a formal submission process. So this has been an annual process, and I just wanted to make sure councillors had an opportunity to overview the projects and offer their support where they've previously already added projects and supported projects. So notes that there is a call for submissions for both the New South Wales and federal government budgets for the next financial year. There is an emphasis on that call for shovel-ready economic stimulus projects to assist in the recovery from the COVID-19 global pandemic. We ask that the City prepares detailed budget submissions for both the New South Wales and federal governments, requesting funding for the delivery of the catalyst area for the Greater Newcastle projects, delivery of infrastructure projects that we've already outlined on our Infrastructure Australia priority list and submission. City of Newcastle identified large-scale priority infrastructure projects and local priority infrastructure projects, which have also been endorsed, and I have reported back through a minute, by our City of Newcastle COVID-19 task force. Requests that the New South Wales and federal government provide funding to deliver the projects associated with the catalyst areas for Greater Newcastle, as identified in the Greater Newcastle Metropolitan Plan 2036, which is attached. Advocates for the New South Wales and federal governments for funding of the delivery following large-scale priority infrastructure projects. The list is all very familiar to you: Newcastle Art Gallery redevelopment, coastal management planning and erosion, especially at Stockton Beach, flood mitigation at Wallsend, the Newcastle Airport upgrade, Port of Newcastle diversification, Hunter Park, Broadmeadows Sports and Entertainment Precinct, Greater Newcastle Light Rail expansion, Lower Hunter Freight Corridor, affordable housing initiatives, metropolitan-wide active transport, walking and cycling improvements, John Hunter Hospital campus upgrades, local sporting amenity upgrades, local playground upgrades, particularly for disability inclusion, a ferry terminal at Wickham, the pensioner rates rebate, and the University of Newcastle STEM Regional Transformation Hub. That we also, in the attachment, and we've discussed this previously, present a number of additional large-scale local-sized infrastructure projects that we have been previously also actively seeking grant funding for, but we are yet to receive funding from either the New South Wales or federal government with some of those. And that is also identified later in the agenda on our economic development strategy. So the organics processing facility at Summerhill Waste Management Centre, Richmond Vale Rail Trail, Newcastle Beach Community Facility, Stage 2 at Newcastle Beach Bathers Way, which includes the new surf club there, the junction to Merriweather Cycleway, Newcastle West Bi-Directional Cycleway, West End Stage 2 Phase 1, Newcastle East End Streetscape Upgrades and Cycleway, Stage 1, Phase 1, Newcastle West End Public Domain and Streetscape Plans, and the Local Centre Program, including Wallsend, Shortland and Stockton Local Centre upgrades. Just thought it's worth noting also that the Infrastructure Australia priority list for 2021 is due for release also at the end of this month, and that it is our nation's independent infrastructure advisor, providing research and advice to governments, industry and the community on the infrastructure investments and reforms that will benefit all Australians. The IA priority list is the authoritative guide to the priority infrastructure investment Australia needs to secure a sustainable and prosperous future. Requests that Newcastle-based projects identified on the Infrastructure Australia priority list be funded as a matter of priority, noting their significance for the national economic recovery. And we convey this by writing to the Prime Minister, the Honourable Scott Morrison MP, Treasurer, the Honourable Josh Frydenberg MP, Senator Holly Hughes, Senator for New South Wales Premier, the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian MP, New South Wales Treasurer, the Honourable Dominic Perrottet MP, Parliamentary Secretary for the Hunter, the Honourable Taylor Martin MLC, seeking their support for these important projects aimed at creating and retaining local jobs and stimulating the local and broader economy. I commend the motion to you, councillors. Is there any discussion? If there's no discussion, I'll commend the motion to you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, there's no votes against. I declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much again for your support, councillors. I'll go on to, this has just actually been brought again to my attention just today. It is an opportunity, I think, that's really important for Newcastle. Build them here, the electric bus technology. This motion simply welcomes the New South Wales Government's decision to designate Australian-based electric bus manufacturer Bustech Group as an official supplier in support of its aim to decarbonise the New South Wales bus fleet by 2030. The New South Wales Government has committed to buying 120 new electric buses in 2021 and converting all 8,000 New South Wales Government buses to electric by 2030. Notes that Bustech, currently based in Queensland, is seeking a manufacturing facility in New South Wales, and notes that 95% of Bustech's supply chain is based in Australia, providing opportunities for locals. Notes Newcastle's long history as a manufacturing hub, specialised in advanced manufacturing, clean tech credentials in batteries and renewable technology and traditional energy, and its connection with the CSIRO Energy Centre and the University of Newcastle, which has just become New South Wales Hydrogen Hub. Writes to the Bus Tech Chairman, Christian Reynolds, and Chief Executive Officer, Tina Stern, inviting them to meet and discuss their product and an opportunity to locate their New South Wales manufacturing facility in Greater Newcastle. And some of the information is contained below. I commend the motion to you and open it up for discussion. Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you for bringing this, Lord Mayor, on minute. Lord Mayor, this is a great opportunity for Newcastle, seeing a large-scale bus manufacturer that's looking to manufacture the next fleet of electric buses, potentially be located in Newcastle, is an opportunity worth exploring. I really appreciate the motion, and I hope that it's fruitful and successful in the next stage of discussions with that company and the New South Wales Government.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there further discussion? Councillor Church.
Lord Mayor, just a question. It's terrific that we're acknowledging this and a business attraction strategy of the first order, and it would bring new jobs and employment. I'm wondering if there's anything else we could do. Could we identify some land? Could we give some rate relief? Could we bring some sort of a benefit to this business that would put our submission ahead of other competing cities and regions? Perhaps that might be worth exploring, and I'd like to place that on the table as something we might pursue.
Thank you, Councillor. I think with your support and with the Councillor's support of this, we will request that meeting as soon as possible and work out what their needs are, what the potential might be for sites in and around this area, because it is a great opportunity. The opportunity also then flows on to help us realise our community goals in our carbon reduction program 2025, in that we're looking at not only our internal footprint and reducing our carbon emissions and really targeting our fleet and our fleet emissions. And one of the issues around us transitioning our fleet onto electric is the ability to service those vehicles, particularly heavy vehicles in Newcastle. So there could be a lot of synergies the city could offer to actually having this type of technology, not only in manufacturing, but ongoing maintenance based in the region. I think it's really in line with also our net zero emissions commitments for the city, more broadly than just our own operations. So I think there are a number of synergies that both Councillor Clausen and Councillor Church have identified that are in line with all of the strategies of the City of Newcastle. And I'm pretty sure that manufacturing unions like the AMWU would be also very supportive of ensuring that there was, new jobs in manufacturing being created here in our region as well. So I think that all of those points are very valid, and hopefully we can convince them that Newcastle, or the Greater Newcastle area, is the right location to start their manufacturing. And if possible, maybe we could actually manufacture the whole 8,000 buses of the fleet and the commitment of the New South Wales Government, which would be fantastic for local jobs. Is there any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against, I declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you again for your support, councillors. Very much appreciated. The final motion is an update on the art gallery redevelopment. There were a number of meetings towards the later last year, and a lot of work being done by our established art gallery advisory working party that's chaired by Kathy Tate, as well as obviously a huge benefaction to the Art Gallery Foundation. So this update, and I wanted to make sure councillors, were aware of some of the work that both agencies were doing and had the opportunity to give their input. Notes that the 44-year-old art gallery is home to the most valuable collection of over 7,000 works of art in regional Australia, with the collection valued now at $115 million. It includes works, as you know, by Arthur Boyd, William Dobell, Donald Friend, Tracy Moffat, Margaret Olley, John Olsen, Patricia Piccinini, Gwen Hanson-Piggott and Brett Whiteley, and that's just naming a few. It acknowledges that the gallery's original 1977 footprint is still in place, and now only 1% of our collection can be placed on display at any time. This significantly inhibits the number, scale and diversity of potential exhibitions. It notes that the expansion of our art gallery has been one of our city's priority projects since 2012 and has really been subject to numerous resolutions of the council. It notes that in 2019, the City of Newcastle and the Newcastle Art Gallery expansion Working Party received a cost-benefit analysis undertaken by BIS Oxford Economics, which is attached, prepared in accordance with New South Wales Treasury requirements for the Newcastle Art Gallery redevelopment, demonstrating that the benefits of the proposal far outweigh the costs, with a cost-benefit ratio of 1.77 and a positive net present value of $24.1 million. Acknowledges that the project will create 170 jobs, including 152 jobs during the construction phase, with 18 full-time equivalent jobs post-completion. It reiterates the investment required to realise an expanded Newcastle Art Gallery. In total is $39.2 million, of which $3.6 million has already been funded by the City of Newcastle, with the remaining cost of completing the expansion currently sitting at $35.6 million, with the development application approved and the project essentially shovel-ready. It notes that the essential mine grouting work and the relocation of a Telstra pit is part of this year's budget and a part of an early works for the expansion, which is already budgeted in this financial year to a cost of $2.9 million. This work again being funded by the city. That brings our total financial investment into the project at $6.5 million to date. It acknowledges the Art Gallery Foundation's commitment of $10 million towards the project, following an amazingly generous bequest from the late Valerie Ryan, as well as the Foundation's commitment to further fundraise an additional $2.5 million for the project. It notes that correspondence has been received this morning from Kathy Tate OAM, Chair of the Newcastle Art Gallery Expansion Working Party, asking the City of Newcastle to increase its commitment to the project to $16 million, following advice from the New South Wales Minister for the Arts. Accepts that the request to increase the City of Newcastle's contribution to $16.2 million with an updated breakdown of funding sources below. So City of Newcastle now $16.2 million, the Art Gallery Foundation $10 million, with a commitment to additional community fundraising of $2.5, noting that the Margaret Olley Trust, if the project goes ahead and only if it goes ahead, have previously years ago committed $500,000. Noting the breakdown of these figures, it sees an outstanding amount of exactly $10 million required to realise this important project, which the City will request from the New South Wales and or federal governments. And it also notes that 75% of the project costs will be raised and funded by either the City of Newcastle, the Newcastle Art Gallery Foundation and the Margaret Olley Trust. It notes with disappointment that despite ongoing advocacy, favourable economic analysis, the expansion shovel-ready studies and modifications to meet the government requests, a funding commitment has not been secured from either New South Wales or Commonwealth Government, and that we receive a report back identifying all possible funding pathways and options available to the City to proceed with the redevelopment of Newcastle Art Gallery. I don't think I need to go into the merits of the project, but what I would like to say is that the attached correspondence from Kathy Tate, OM, does outline basically the request from the Minister at the last meeting with the Foundation. He had previously to that meeting said we needed to increase our benefaction. And then not long after that, there was a significant bequest of up to $10 million. At the next meeting, he said that we needed to increase our commitment as council to the project. I think that is something that we should definitely consider this evening to come in line with the New South Wales government requests, and that he possibly couldn't source funding when we discussed the minute around the new grants and cultural facilities grants that were announced to be part of future New South Wales government budgets. That we couldn't be considered for more than, say, $10 million. So really this is to bring us in line with the request of the New South Wales Government in the hope that that final $10 million can be secured and this very valuable project to the city can eventually get underway. I'll open it up for discussion, councillors, if there's any discussion. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think most people in the city are supportive of our regional art gallery and acknowledge its significance. There is the question of value for money and utilisation. The gallery receives about 100,000 guests per year, and our inland pools receive about 1 million visits a year. So the question is, should we be contributing 16.2 million to the art gallery at the expense of something else? And I believe that needs to be a part of our normal budgetary process, a process where this submission is put forward, it then goes to consultation, and the community is then made clear that if we do accept that we want to expend this large sum of money on the art gallery, it would be at the expense of something else. And the community needs to be able to make that value judgment for themselves. I have some concern about the wording on point 10, that we accept the request to increase City of Newcastle's contribution. I think at this stage it might be worthwhile if we amend that to say we note the request, because I don't think we're in a position right now to simply accept and endorse that expenditure which is implied by that wording. But I'll take your advice on that. At this stage, with it as it stands, I find it difficult to support, because I don't think we've done enough rigorous work and put that expenditure through the normal transparent process of community consultation through the budget review.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other discussion? What I would say is if we want this project to go ahead and we want funding from the New South Wales Government, the Minister made it very clear at that meeting, as outlined by the Chair of the Expansion Working Committee, that we could not request any more than $10 million. So the funding, the extra $6 million, because our funding commitment is already, with including expense funds, at around $10 million, and it has been for a number of years. So the additional $6 million over the next 2-year budget cycles, I think, is an affordable, would be an affordable component of our future budgets, if and only, it would only be expensed if we had the $10 million. So I think that our budgets are being prepared for the next financial year at the moment, and then obviously our not just our 1-year delivery program, but our 4-year program as well, because this build would take over 2 years to complete. I think with your support tonight, we actually need to start putting it in consideration for our budget for next year, and also make sure that we're advocating for the $10 million difference, because if that $10 million does come, then we can actually put the project out to tender and actually then deliver the project. If the $10 million doesn't come, then that money would have to go on another project in the city, and that's what's happened over a number of years, because we haven't been able to secure funding from either the New South Wales or the federal government. But unless we take some sort of action and acknowledge that the landscape has significantly changed in the last 12 months, given the exceptionally generous philanthropy of Valerie Ryan and her family to the art gallery, and the $10 million commitment by the foundation, that is an opportunity that the city, again, shouldn't miss. And if that means we ramp up our advocacy to both state and federal governments over the next couple of months, and then we look at putting the extra commitment to the art gallery through our budget processes, which go out on public exhibition, then come back for adoption, I think that would be the wisest course, and that would be what would result from support of this minute this evening. We can't just go and build the project until we have the funds secured, and that the project is still, even with the extra commitment up to 16.2 now, noting that 6.5 will already be spent at the end of this financial year on the project of the City of Newcastle over the last few years, that it is an exceptionally worthy project. It's been a priority project for a number of years. It's exceptionally unfortunate that there was a commitment from the federal government of $7 million and a likely impending commitment of $7 million at that time. $14 million at that time was likely coming, definitely coming from the federal government, and likely coming from the state to build the project back in 2012. And unfortunately, decisions of the council at that time did not allow that project to go ahead, and I think it is incumbent on us to work with both the state government and the federal government to actually realise this project for our community. Is there any other discussion? Councillor Rufo.
Lord Mayor, I just wanted to ask if point 10, Lord Mayor, if you would be happy to, that I move we change the word accepts to notes, as suggested by Councillor Church. And moving an amendment to your Lord Mayor Minute, that we change the word accepts the request to increase to notes the request to increase.
Certainly. I will take it as an amendment, seconded by Councillor Church. I would like to keep this wording because it gives certainty. We can't go and advocate unless we are clear about how much we're contributing. The Minister said you need to contribute more. Unless we're clear about what we're contributing, i.e. $16 million, we can't very well ask for 10. Because what happens if he says, yeah, here's 10, and we're all sitting here going, oh, but we're not sure about the extra 6. So I think we have to be abundantly clear that they've asked us to put in more money. We're considering that request. And tonight I'm saying to you, councillors, that is the feedback from the Minister. And I'm having that discussion with you now, the first meeting of the year. And then this is a clear indication to our staff that the advocacy needs to ramp up over the next couple of months to get the $10 million. And then if we can get that, the extra $6 million will go through a budget process. It'll have to be in our publicly exhibited budget process. So we can't note it. What we need to do is make sure we're willing to commit to it if the federal or state government can put in $10 million. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Duncan.
Lord Mayor, thank you. Yes, I just want to speak in support of the Lord Mayoral Minute. Thank you so much for bringing this to us. There's been plenty of discussion and conflation of being able to go for a swim with being able to visit and see extraordinary works by Brett Whiteley and similar artists. I'm just wondering when a priority is no longer a priority. This item has been a priority for this city and this council since 2012. I don't think that anything has changed that. I just wanted to note and reiterate once again that you mentioned, Lord Mayor, we have a $115 million collection here that is owned by the people of the city of Newcastle. It's not owned by us, it's not owned by you, it is owned by all of the people in this city. It is incredibly distressing that we are still trying to get this job done, that people in this city are only able to see, and visitors, 1% of our amazing collection at any time. The cost-benefit analysis has been done. We understand the minimum potential of what a redeveloped art gallery can bring to us in this city and this region. And I just wanted to point out to councillors, in case they're unaware, of the HOTA project on the Gold Coast, which is a massive cultural project by the City Council up there. One of those projects is the new Home of the Arts Art Gallery. It is a $60.5 million art gallery to house a $32 million collection. I can only assume they are going to have significant increase in visitation and tourism because of the commitment that city is making to its arts and its cultural activities on this 16.9 hectare site that they're working on in the city. But a $60.5 million art gallery for a $32 million collection. Our collection is worth nearly 4 times that, and it is long overdue that our collection in this city is treated with the respect and the investment and the protection and the opportunity that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, councillors, for the contributions. I think they're all been worthwhile taking into consideration. The 1% availability of our art galleries are often cited reference to just how outdated our art gallery is, but the one that always triggers for me is the one that we don't have a covered loading zone for our art gallery, which means that there are very few national, probably very few state, certainly no international exhibitions that can exhibit in our gallery because there is no guarantee that the art will be protected. There's no way to bring it in the event of rain or any other conditions, and it certainly won't be insured for such a purpose. It's an extraordinary shortfall in a gallery of such significance. That being said, the $16.2 million is not an insubstantial amount of money. It is a big commitment. I'm very concerned that the contribution from the federal government seems to have completely fallen off. We're relying now, it seems, on a $10 million promise from the state government without any contribution whatsoever from the federal government. And this was a project, as you rightly point out, was made available in the first instance by a commitment of tripartite funding between council, federal and state government. I think the key to me is the part 13 of this Lord Mayoral Minute, that we receive a report identifying all possible funding pathways and options available to the city to proceed with the redevelopment. I certainly would feel more comfortable supporting our commitment to increase it to 16.2 if I had a clearer understanding of where that funding was coming from, what kinds of money was being made available from the feds, who do have absolutely a commitment in this space, and to make sure that we're not putting all of our eggs in the basket of the state government on the basis of this. So I would be happy at this point to note the request to increase, receiving that report at part 13, and then making a more firm commitment to the 16.2 million based on the findings from that report. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Luke.
Lord Mayor, just a suggestion. And I know you're not comfortable with notes, and I know some councillors are not comfortable with accepts, but I'm just wondering if we can maybe come up with a wording that could cover both sides. And I was just thinking of something that notes and supports in principle might do. I don't know if that will cover you, but that might end up with. I'm not going to move it as amendment. You can just tell me whether or not if you're happy to do that, maybe we could adjust the amendment slightly.
Are you saying supports in principle the request?
Supports the request in principle.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that wording.
Because I think that
Because
might
we
be
have to
that
be
we
very-
aren't accepting it as a
Yep.
budget item right now. Because it is a bit weird to accept it and then say we're about to get a report. We're asking for a report on the same thing. Just thinking that through.
Okay, so that's a good suggestion. So I'm happy. I don't think we can just note it. We have to be very clear with staff what they're reporting back to us. So supports in principle the request. So they are clear about what they're preparing in terms of the budget for us this year. And I've already explained what that point is. So I'm very comfortable with that. So I'm happy to accept that suggestion. Thank you, Councillor Luke. If the mover and seconder of the amendment are comfortable with that, you can withdraw the amendment, or I can still. You probably just.
Happy with that, Lord Mayor. Sorry.
Okay. Councillor Rufo is happy to withdraw the amendment. And I think that gets us to a good place. I just think we need to be really clear that if we are going to go for $10 million in grant funding, because previously we've been going for $16.5 million and everyone has said no. So we've taken that feedback and we have to either increase our commitment or just not do the project. I'm not comfortable with not doing the project. I think it's a really important project for our city, and I think that we need to. There is a very reasonable chance that this has been a very difficult project to get grant funding since that original federal commitment of $7 million many years ago. And we do probably need to make sure that the report back to us explores other options for funding. I think that's really important because this is not the same situation as 12 months ago. There is $10 million in philanthropy for that building. And every year we wait, it costs more to build. So this, the attached cost benefit analysis summary that Kathy Tate OAM sent through that was done for the city and for the Working Party last year actually goes through an extensive amount of work the BIS Oxford Economics did do. And to get that number to over 1, which is a Treasury requirement, to 1.77 is actually a really high cost benefit ratio. It ticks all the boxes for Treasury and has a really high net present value at over $24 million. So the project in terms of Treasury requirements, when it's being run through a Treasury, it really stacks up. So we have, and the staff have worked to tick every single box that has been requested through this grant funding. For example, to get that, the 1.77, they actually have to test through surveying the non-user benefit to all of New South Wales. So they actually had to run a survey that was statistically significant for everyone that never uses the gallery in New South Wales to test whether they thought that was a valuable use of taxpayer money, and that came out high. So there has been a very rigorous process in putting together the business case through Treasury requirements. This is not just an afterthought. This is a very important project that is ticking all the boxes for our city. So I think it's really important we send a clear message to staff that we are willing to look at that increase in coming year budgets if we can get that extra $10 million of funding. And then we also need to receive a report back on what some of those funding options are, because we cannot let that type of philanthropy go to waste. Also worth mentioning, whilst we're talking about it, is that it has been made very clear to me that there are a number of philanthropists and donors that are exceptionally supportive of this project that will not commit funding to this project until it is green lighted to go ahead. So until we can actually ensure that we have most of the funding together, so we meet the local government tendering requirements under the Act to have the funding for the project to go ahead, there is likely, and the foundation are quite aware of it, to be extra philanthropy come to this project, but they won't commit to it while there isn't a project on the table. So I think it's important that we keep moving this forward, and that's what this minute is doing tonight. Councillor Rufo.
Lord Mayor, thank you. Just to be clear, have we spoken to the federal government, and have they given us an answer, or are we going to be chasing funds from the federal government?
Yes.
Because we're talking 10 million and just focusing on state. Just want to know, have we approached them, or are we going to approach them?
Yes. You'll be pleased to know that, again, I've been relentless, and I have met and with colleagues of Councillor Luke's, Senator Holly Hughes, her staff, who is the New South Wales Federal Government Senator. I think it mentions her that was the previous correspondence. We've met with state government representatives. We've met with a number of federal government representatives. I've even given this to other agencies that are advocating for different projects on that list in the Greater Newcastle Metropolitan. I've given them the art gallery information. I said, well, while you're down there in Canberra, could you just ask them about the art gallery? Like, we have tried many, many different variety of sources, and this minute doesn't this is based on feedback from the New South Wales Arts Minister, particularly because that Cultural Infrastructure Fund was being established in the next budget. But it also doesn't, it says and or federal government. So my expectation is that the advocacy will be continual to both levels of government. And, you know, if they both put in, our contribution can be lessened again. But I think it's our asset, and we need to take the lead on that expansion project. Is there any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors, for your support. Much appreciated. Councillors, I'll just run through our agenda, and if there are any items that you don't need discussion on, just let me know, and I'll get a mover and a seconder. Item 1, probably have to discuss that, don't we? Item 2, well, that's probably going to need to be discussed. No, item 3, termination of outdated policies. Moved Councillor Clausen, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? So there are no votes against. I declare that motion carried unanimously. Item 4, tabling of Register of Disclosures of Interest, the 1st of November to the 31st of January 2021. Moved by Councillor Mackenzie, seconded by Councillor Rufo. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? Declare that motion carried unanimously. Item 5, Natural Disaster Clause. Item 6, Wood Street, Newcastle West, one-way traffic flow, southbound and angled parking. Happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Mackenzie, seconded by Councillor Rufo. All those in favour, please raise their hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. Item 7, adoption of parking plan. Adoption of cycling plan. Public exhibition of the draft economic development strategy. Public exhibition of the draft grants policy and sponsorship policy. Variations to development standards. Moved by Councillor Clausen, seconded by Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. The Liquor Amendment Bill 2020 update, item 12. December quarterly budget review. 6 monthly performance report on the 2018-2022 delivery program. 15, executive monthly performance report. Moved by Councillor Clausen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Luke, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Winnie Bartz, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. All those against, please stand. Councillor Rufo, Councillor Church. I declare that motion carried. Item 16, Audit and Risk Committee 2019-20 Annual Report. I'll go back to the first item on the substantive agenda. Council Representative on External Committee, Newcastle Art Gallery Foundation Board. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Duncan? Councillor, I think you have to nominate somebody.
Lord Mayor, yes, I'd like to nominate Councillor Clausen for this role, if he would consider accepting this. I had spent some time as an invited director on the Art Gallery Foundation some years ago, and it's an extraordinary organisation, and this is a very important point in its history and development for the Art Gallery.
Thank you, Councillor Clausen. Do you accept that nomination?
Happy to accept, Lord Mayor.
Are there any further nominations? Well, that's the motion I have before me. Is there any discussion? If there's no discussion, would you like a right of reply? Items moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. Sorry, who seconded that motion? Was that you, Councillor Byrne? Thank you. Item 2, nomination to list Newcastle Recreation Reserve Kingawa Park on the State Heritage Register. Do I have a mover? Councillor Clausen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor White. Councillor Duncan. No, I think Councillor White seconded it. Yeah, her hand was up first. Did you want to speak?
Lord Mayor, yes,
Did the mover or second want to speak to the motion?
Happy to hear from Councillor Duncan.
No, Councillor Duncan, you have the floor.
You're right, you three. Eventually, Lord Mayor, thank you. Look, I'd like to recommend that we actually lay this item on the table, noting that we've received a request from the Friends of King Edward Park to present to a public voice session.
I note that's a procedural motion.
Look, I'm not going to refer to the earlier events of the evening.
So I note that's a procedural motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. I think it's a very good idea. I'll put the motion by the division. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Church, Councillor Rufo, Councillor Bird, Councillor Winnie Bartz, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. All those against, please stand. Councillor Luke. I declare that motion carried. Item 5, the Natural Disaster Clause, Newcastle LEP 2012. Councillor Clausen, you moving the motion?
Please, Lord Mayor.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation as printed. I only want to speak very briefly, but just to thank the staff for bringing the report to council. I had quite a good conversation with Ms Bisson last week, outlining some concerns that I had with the natural disaster clause and the potential ramifications in the event of a major natural disaster like the previous earthquake that the city experienced. There are a number of protections that are included in the way that this clause is implemented, principally the fact that it only applies to residential properties. It is worth saying that I do have some concerns with the process and the fact that the Department of Planning have made councils nominate in what I think is a fairly clumsy way in order for it to be to amend the LEP by way of a SEP. My preference would have been that if they thought it was a good idea for the state, that it be made mandatory, or that there be some mechanism for us to update via the LEP in the normal way. But that aside, I'm comfortable with the report before us and happy to support the inclusion of the clause.
Thank you, councillor. Is there any other discussion, councillors? Would you like a right of reply? I need to take the vote by division. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Church, Councillor Rufo, Councillor Luke, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Winnie Bartz, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. As there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried. Councillors, item 7, adoption of parking plan. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Winnie Bartz, do I have a seconder? Councillor Duncan, would you like to speak to the motion, councillor?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Happy to be here tonight to support the adoption of our parking plan that we were briefed on and have spoken about in recent months. As Council's representative to Traffic Committee, it has become very clear over the last few years that a comprehensive and strategic parking plan is necessary to eliminate reactional solutions that have previously occurred around the city. We all want amenity around our residential areas, whilst at the same time providing support to our thriving local business areas. It's imperative that we improve and properly manage parking supply, promote turnover, and encourage that connected city and walkable neighbourhood that we all desire. The team here at the City of Newcastle, led by Simon Greason, have undertaken a range of community and stakeholder engagement experiences to gain greater understanding of what it is that is wanted, needed and desired around the city. The aim of this strategy is to provide enough spaces to support reasonable turnover and reasonable access by cars, while at the same time supporting more riding, more walking, more use of public transport and the consideration of other options. We know historically that vehicle trips, particularly to the CBD, have been the majority of them due to a commute for work. But we also see through our advocacy and consultation that people want other options. During this consultation, we saw an agreement that streetscapes as a whole need to accommodate a range of purposes: walking, bike riding, public transport and private car. While we are acutely aware that parking spaces are of a significant importance to a vibrant street space, we are becoming more aware that if people can walk or cycle or use other transport to get to their local centre, they will inevitably spend more time there, engaging them in their community and as an owner of that space, as well as a consumer. Getting the balance right is imperative to the delivery of a people-centric city. Simply reacting to a problem by only focusing on one area or space inevitably leads to fragmented and reactional solutions. Managing parking will not only improve our street amenity, but support our businesses and encourage diversified thought on the how of getting somewhere. Improving parking controls on developments, managing demand, figuring out the right price, making it simple for a consumer will greatly assist in this entire process. A great example of this policy at work has already been displayed at Orchardtown Road in our Blackbutt Village renewal. I've received many representations about vehicle speed, safety and parking in this area. As part of our local centres renewal, the presentation precinct's public domain and traffic plan has resulted in a safer space with slower speed for pedestrians, which include shoppers and others, cyclists, and will also obviously result in the slowing down of traffic through many of the measures undertaken, but as well as timed parking changes to assist in turnover, which is inevitably going to lead to an increase in parking vacancies in the area. This plan considers that amenity is for the whole community and not just for our car drivers. The implementation of this strategy, the implementation plan, attached to this strategy will show exactly what is being done to achieve these desired outcomes. Reviewing our DA controls, advocating to state government around the Greater Newcastle Futures Transport Plan, optimising utilisation to improve outcomes, the development of a plan for reinvestment for paid parking contributions to the areas where they're collected, and the collection of data so that we can accurately achieve these parking outcomes. In closing, I'd like to also add that I have a Part B to consider that I'd like to be distributed that just reads, that Council continues to work with other public agencies listed as HCCDC, the University of Newcastle and Newcastle Transport, and the private sector to improve public transport in Newcastle, including park and rides, rapid bus transit and light rail extensions, and increase the supply of parking as the city recovers from COVID-19 and a new development is undertaken in the CBD and the suburbs. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Great, thank you, Councillor. So you're moving Part B and the substantive motion as Part A. Okay, thank you. Are there any other speakers? Would the seconder like to speak? Is that you? Oh, wonderful.
Lord Mayor, thank you. And Councillor Winnie Bartz, thank you for bringing this forward. Lord Mayor, thank you. Councillor Winnie Bartz, thank you as well. And noting the Part B, I just wanted to make a comment once again on, and I do feel like it's a little bit like Groundhog Day talking about public transport in this city, in this chamber, but public transport truly has become an oxymoron in this city and this region. I think we need to continue to lobby incredibly hard the New South Wales government to simply get real about funding genuine and truly useful public transport options, not just throughout our LGA, but across our obviously permeable borders with our LGA neighbours as well. I'm not sure if it's true or anecdote that the majority of our workforce in the city of Newcastle comes from outside our own LGA, but it would certainly explain what becomes a car park twice a day on Maitland Road, Industrial Drive and the New England Highway heading out towards Maitland, and to that City Road and the Pacific Highway does of a morning and afternoon as well, heading out to Charlestown and to the Lake Macquarie eastern suburbs. This continues to be a major problem for all of us in this city, particularly for younger people who may be without transport, without their own private transport, the need to rely on public transport to come into Newcastle for a night out. If you're a teenager or a young adult and you don't have your own transport, is incredibly significant. But the problems, the increase that it puts on as well, our parking issues that we're discussing tonight, amenity within the city as well is huge. And so I would just strongly request again that we continue at the highest level to agitate and to advocate for real public transport solutions in the city of Newcastle and across our bordering LGAs.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thanks to the staff who have worked very hard on this plan. Parking, as you know, is a highly contentious issue in Newcastle. From the very start of this document, in fact, from the CEO's own comments, it's made clear that paid parking schemes are an important mechanism in helping to manage parking demand. And the document spends a lot of time on that demand management. But what we find is that this report highlights major changes in parking supply, but is very light on the detail. We note the closure of the Lee Wharf temporary car park, the reduction in spaces at the temporary Throsby car park, the removal of spaces in the Hunter Street due to the light rail, the closure of the David Jones car park, the closure of the Mall car park, and the opening of the number 2 sports ground for parking. I've attempted today to ask staff to help me quantify how many spaces have actually been lost from these events, and that information has not come forward. But I would suggest it could be in the thousands. The report doesn't quantify the number of parking spaces lost, but we have seen a number of major buildings approved in our city without sufficient car parking, and that includes new space in the courthouse. We know that the Newcastle University has plans to have more than 4,000 people at its Honeysuckle campus, and when completed, it still won't provide car parking facilities to our codes. And while broadly identifying the problems with supply, the report is light on plans to have any remedy for the situation. I'm very glad to see it finally mentioned in the Part B, Councillor Winnie Bartz, and I thank you for that. It's still unclear why we have allowed a transport interchange to be developed at Wickham without any provision for public car parking. Underpinning this plan is an ideological position that cars shouldn't be in our city, even though more than 70% of us use cars to get to and from work or to shop, and only 1.9% of us use push bikes to get to work. We also know that during the COVID pandemic, our public transport was problematic as it wasn't a healthy alternative for many people. Instead, the plan has a focus on demand management, and this is code for more on-street parking meters in more places and at higher prices. The community has raised concerns that we're likely to see parking meters in suburbs like Cooks Hill, Wickham and Carrington as part of demand management strategies in the future. And there's a real possibility, because Council has granted the CEO delegated authority to install parking meters in the city without returning to this chamber for approval and endorsement. Last year, we heard from struggling small businesses in Hunter Street who had simply asked us to trial 1 hour free parking. This was roundly opposed by my friends opposite. The business owners were told that the issue would be canvassed in the upcoming parking plan. And here we are. I've been unable to find a mention of even a trial. We should also remember that parking decisions have a real impact on people's lives. These are not faceless decisions. They impact on jobs and livelihoods. Let me share with you some correspondence from a Hunter Street mall trader about the impacts of closing the King Street car park and the local road closures, and what impact that has had on his business and his livelihood. I cannot express, he writes, I cannot express enough the stress this has caused my business, both financially and emotionally. Council has effectively removed the majority of the car parking availability to my customers and those of surrounding Hunter Street mall businesses. Does Newcastle Council have any idea of the catastrophic ramifications these decisions have had on Hunter Street mall businesses? We cannot and should not be focused to wait years for change to occur and suffer in the interim. End of quote. I simply cannot support this plan in its current form. We need to do more work on other parking options to support our city and its future growth.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? No other speakers? Would you like your right of reply, Councillor Winnie Bartz? What I would say is I don't think you're ever going to please anybody all the time when it comes to parking in the city centre. It's a good start to make sure we're having a very strategic approach. There was a couple of questions raised, I think by Councillor Church, in regard to parking decisions, most of which, or besides one or two of them, the majority were decisions of the New South Wales Government or car parks operated by them or roads that are now operated by the New South Wales Government. And to vent concern around a lot of those changes, it'd be really good maybe to see an advocacy piece directed at the New South Wales Government, considering the first 4 points that he made in regards to the changes in parking or parking closing were all land operated by the New South Wales Government, not by council. The only car park that is an issue for us at the moment, and we have received a report on that and we're actually taking action on that, is the King Street car park. And I think it's really important that we have and asked our staff to investigate how we can retain those 380 car parking spaces. And I do note earlier tonight we made a decision to increase Newcastle West car parking by an additional 18 spaces. And I think that it is really important to recognise that council is not the only player in parking in the city. There's a number of private car parks. There are roads that aren't operated by council. There are car parks that also aren't operated by council. And there are a number of car parks operated by the private sector. So we're one of many, and I do thank Councillor Winnie Bartz for her motion, given that a number of the locations, also that Councillor Church mentioned, were also New South Wales Government or federally funded agencies and institutions that don't have his personal requirement for parking on them. Do you, CEO, have any update to those questions?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. A couple of things that I'd like to draw to the council's attention is one, when we have discussions, robust discussions about the availability of parking supply in the city, we need to be looking at the supply right now and going forward. We cannot, as an organisation, ignore the very meaningful effect that COVID-19 has had on the changing dynamic of our workforce in the city. Looking at the most recent figures, month completed for January of this year, metered parking transactions are almost 10% below what they were at a comparable point in time of January last year. So we're seeing a very significant impact on our organisation and on parking supply, or parking demand rather, as a result of COVID and what has been a very well-reported increase in the desire and willingness of employers to allow staff to work from home either 5 days a week or several days a week. So that has had effectively a very positive impact of almost 10% in terms of increasing that parking supply in the city. It's also worth noting the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic, specifically on our own car parks. Number 2 car park, just up the road in Newcastle West, immediately behind Market Town, that is down by 82% compared with 12 months ago. So again, the impact of COVID-19 has been very real and very meaningful in terms of reducing the demand for parking in the city. As recently as today, the demand for parking at number 2 car park, number 2 sports ground car park, is down by 89% today. So just again, to give you a very real measure of just how significant COVID-19 has been in reducing the demand on parking in our city. Councillor Church, you noted a number of car park closures. You noted the closure of the temporary Lee Wharf car park. That's absolutely noted. Light rail construction has also reduced the number of spaces on Hunter Street and Scott Street. The David Jones car park, yes, has closed. However, Iris is required under their development application to see a net increase in car spaces. So the David Jones car park provided 386 spaces. Iris is required to provide an additional 410 new spaces. It's also worth noting, I think you mentioned a reduction in parking at the Throsby Creek car park. That was a temporary reduction that was required for the straightening of Honeysuckle Drive. That project is completed, and that temporary loss of car parking has been returned to the car park. Speaking of it, my friends at HCCDC, they opened up 80 new car spaces at Station Street last year, an extra 66 new spaces at Steel Lane last year. City of Newcastle, we're in the final process of completing detailed design for the construction of an additional 30 spaces at Boat Harbour down on the foreshore. As the Lord Mayor noted, 18 additional spaces tonight. And the one that hasn't been, or certainly I didn't hear mentioned tonight, was the construction of the Newcastle Interchange car park, which has 700 new spaces. And while I acknowledge that they are branded as temporary in much the same way as the Lee Wharf car park was also a temporary car park before being closed, there is no scheduled date for when that car park will no longer be open to the public. So that is actually a net increase of 359 spaces in the city over the last 2 years. Further, it's worth noting for the councillors tonight, as you consider this, that the parking plan is not a look back in time. It is very much at looking at the demand that we have today, the demand that we are going to have over the coming years. I think the report goes to great length to make clear that paid metered parking is an absolute last resort. It is never the first resort. I've said that privately. I've said that publicly at community meetings. The report makes very clear there is no current or long-term intention for the introduction of paid parking in Cooks Hill. What this plan does is propose a number of actions over the coming 5 years for looking at how we can do substantially better with what we already have. There is no doubt that an ad hoc approach to parking decisions over the last 10 or so years has not been the right approach. What this plan proposes is a measured, evidence-based approach to ensuring that we have the right number and the right type of parking in our CBD. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a quick question for the General Manager on something you said. First I'll just make the comment. I think the idea that we plan based on what the usage of public parking is during a pandemic is probably a very dangerous way to base what the future is. I think any expectation that this is automatically what the normal is going forward in 5 and 10 years is not necessarily going to be how it pans out. But my real concern is the comment about the Iris car park. My understanding of the Iris car parks is that, yes, they are building a heap of car parks, but they're actually for people going into the apartments they're building, that very few of those, if any, in fact, I don't think any, are public available car parks. So the David Jones car park that was there previously could be used by members of the public. The real concern here is car parks available for the public. Those car parks, my understanding is, aren't going to be available for the public. They're available for people who will be there for the use of the people who live in the units that are being built by Iris.
I might ask you to respond.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Luke, just to clarify in regard to COVID-19, my reference to COVID-19 is we're not planning today. What I am saying is we need to be very careful so that the decisions that we make are not based on pre-pandemic parking demand in the city. We simply don't know what parking demand is going to be in the city, as you say, over the coming years. But what we have seen almost exactly 12 months after the outbreak of the pandemic is a net reduction in parking demand of 10%. Now, whether that returns in the near future, we simply don't know. Therefore, we will, over the coming 12 months, be seeking, and longer, the evidence to actually ascertain what is the long-term demand for parking in our city. My understanding is that the Iris DA contains a mix of course, residential parking, but as well as parking for the public.
Thank you, Councillor Rufo. Councillor, you don't have to stand.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Appreciate that. Lord Mayor, through you to the CEO, just a question in relation to our council-owned King Street car park, which is currently closed, and I understand why it's closed. My question is, there's 380 car spots there. What are we doing with that car park? Are we going to be repairing it, or are we selling it off? Because I'm hearing from members of the public that it's actually been sold already.
Councillor Rufo, at our December meeting, we discussed this. It's in the minutes, in tonight's minutes. But I could just ask for you, maybe even to Director Clark, or to yourself,
I'm happy
to give an update. Council, we actually discussed this at our meeting in December, around that as an issue. We've actually asked staff to progress either having to redevelop it ourselves or partnering. So we're in the process of the investigation for the staff to then report back to us. But I can get an update.
It's still under investigation, because as I've said, I've been advised by members of the public, and I know people talk, that it's actually already been sold.
Councillor Rufo, as the Lord Mayor said, there was an extensive paper and presentation to councillors at the December ordinary meeting. I appreciate you were unable to attend on the basis of illness. I remember having a number of conversations with you before that meeting about your condition at that time. Categorically, the car park hasn't been sold. It can't be sold. It's an asset. The Local Government Act requires that a decision to sell a public asset or a council-owned asset requires a resolution of the council. So that hasn't happened. But what I can say is that a development application has been submitted for the demolition of the car park. Structurally, it's actually past end of life. It's a 60-year car park, 60-year-old car park that was designed to survive around about 50 years. It's in an area where it's extremely exposed to salt air. It's, as we say, we've got exceptionally good value for money out of that car park and extended as long as what we can do. It's my intention to bring a paper to the March Ordinary Council meeting for a significant update on what has been referred to as the Stairway to Heaven concept to Council for their consideration. But in terms of current plans, it's simply that the car park will be demolished, and what ultimately is there in its place will be a decision for this council, recognising that I know the Lord Mayor, I know I have given a commitment that there'll be no net loss of car parking, recognising that car park previously was capable of servicing 380 people. It's probably also worth noting, I have the, I don't know if it's the fortune or not, but to speak with with a number of operators of private car parks throughout the city, whether pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and they all give me a very similar story at the moment, and that is that they have significant capacity in terms of spaces. In the vicinity of about 33% of those car parks, their words, not mine, are currently free and haven't really improved greatly over the last couple of months. So just further to Councillor Luke's point, yes, I think we need to be very careful with our planning to ensure that decisions that are made with substantial consideration of the pandemic and what is the new norm, because we don't know and we're not going to know for some time.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion, councillors? Oh, Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, that was quite an interesting debate to listen to. Councillor Church brought lots of numbers. It was nice to hear from the CEO to refute a number of the claims that were made. There was a few opportunities to raise points of order during Councillor Church's comments. I resisted the urge, but it is worth correcting for the record, similar to as you did, Lord Mayor, particularly around the number of decisions that have been made by other levels of government. There were lots of accusations made about decisions made by this council that simply weren't true. In fact, things that were observably not true, with notice of motion, Lord Mayoral minutes and the like coming to this council, positions opposite to that which he articulated. Things like the removal of parking as a result of light rail construction. That was something that this council very strongly opposed. We put out an alternate vision for the way that light rail could be delivered so that parking could be retained. There are accusations about development approved by other levels of government, state significant development that didn't have parking included in the final approved plans, where council had made submissions that very strongly requested and opposed development on the basis that sufficient parking wasn't required. So I think this council has a track record of standing up to ensure that there is appropriate parking that comes as a result of development. There are a couple of numbers in the report that Councillor Church didn't make reference to, which I think is important too. He claimed earlier this evening that he's interested in numbers and the finances, but we need to be clear to the community, and this report identifies the cost of delivering a single new parking space in the City of Newcastle is between $50,000 and $126,000 for one car parking space. We've seen evidence of that just up the road with the new Maitland Hospital car park costing $30 million just for the hospital car park. The report goes on to identify that paid parking was actually introduced in the City of Newcastle in 1950. Yet tonight we had a discussion trying to rediscuss some 70 years worth of history in terms of the way that the parking has operated in the City of Newcastle and how demand is appropriately managed to make sure that we have parking space availability. Something that hasn't been discussed, but I do want to raise because I think is actually an amazing policy innovation. It's something really positive to see coming out of this report. And that is the idea that we'll be looking at the ways that we can reinvest the proceeds of revenue collected through parking back into the precincts that it's collected. That allows people that are paying for parking to nobody wants to pay for parking. Like, I think that we can all agree that it's a pain and people want to avoid it, but it is important to make sure that we have appropriate turnover and demand management. But when you pay for parking, knowing that it's reinvested in to the immediate precinct, I think is something that is exceptionally comforting. People will be able to see improvements in the local streetscape as a result of the parking revenue that they're providing. And so I think that is something that is worthwhile further progressing. I'm glad that it's included in a plan as an action. Thank you.
All excellent points, Councillor Clausen. Are there any further speakers? I just wanted, for Councillor Rufo's benefit and just to remind councillors, because it's been raised a couple of times, just on page 20 and 21, I'll be on your iPad, is the Stairway to Heaven concept that was carried unanimously, and we did have quite a detailed discussion. I think it's really important because as I said and as Councillor Clausen said, a number of the issues that Councillor Church raised were with car parks that were either controlled by the state government and or privately owned, but the one car park he did mention is actually owned by us, and we've already taken action on that at our last council meeting. It's that we unanimously resolved to endorse the Stairway to Heaven concept. We recognise that the 60-year-old car park was beyond its use-by date and wasn't safe or compliant. We asked the CEO to undertake a feasibility analysis to progress the Stairway to Heaven concept, and that was to explore potential for the Moore car park site to be redelivered. So the concept of opening it up, that view corridor to the cathedral, and to ensure that the estimated 380 public car parking spaces were retained, and that important social infrastructure was also retained on that site, for example, the Senior Citizens Centre. And that would also mean that staff would enter into some without prejudice discussions with Iris Capital, being the adjacent landowners, and also having the development consent actually all the way around it that would preclude the Stairway to Heaven concept actually going ahead. Assessing the ongoing requirements for the public car parking provision in the CBD and the need for that in that space, and ensuring where necessary strengthening controls in the DCP to protect the view corridors to Christchurch Cathedral, to go to Asset Advisory Urban Design Consultative Group for advice, and that any of the final decisions have to come back to Council. Councillor Winnie Bartz, would you like your right of reply?
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I think two factors here we need reminding of is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, and we seem to talk about the same thing over and over in this chamber. And this is a data-driven, forward-thinking solution with a number of positive outcomes right in front of us tonight. And that this is a parking plan that actually addresses parking issues for the whole LGA. We seem to spend a lot of time talking about parking solutions for the CBD, which, as we all know, is a changing point of geography. And so focusing constantly on the same thing over and over is quite seriously frustrating. So instead of perhaps in this year of local government election, electioneering and politicising this issue, doing something about it tonight is going to change the whole scope of our parking frustrations in the CBD and the LGA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll put the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Winnie Bartz, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. All those against, please stand. Councillor Church, Councillor Rufo, Councillor Luke. I declare the motion carried. We're up to item 8, adoption of the cycling plan. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mackenzie, do I have a seconder? Councillor Winnie Bartz or Councillor Clausen, whichever one who wants it. Councillor Winnie Bartz, you've got it.
Thank you nonetheless to both Councillor Winnie Bartz and Councillor Clausen for the intention to second that motion. Very pleased to see this come to fruition, Lord Mayor. This is an update of the plan from 2012 with a lot of very positive things to say about how we actually deliver the cycling targets that are articulated in the plan. I think what this plan does is it shows let me say it this way: there is not too many changes in terms of where the cycleways are to be proposed in this plan. In fact, we had a very clear idea going into this where the cycleway network was, where it should be, where the gaps were. And this plan, rather than reinvent that, actually adopts many of the proposals that come from the Safe Cycleway Network developed in 2012, 2013, and sees those through to fruition. It's rather an update in terms of the lines on the road rather than anything significant in terms of changes. And I think that shows the good work that was done early on, and it reiterates the importance of the work that needs to be continuing to be done to deliver that safe cycleways network. I think if I'm to say what is the key contribution of this plan in terms of improving the way that we deliver active transport in the city, which is a stated goal of what we're trying to accomplish here, it is in terms of the governance arrangements around the cycleways program. And I think where we have fallen down is how we understand the money that's been invested, how this chamber has allocated funding to cycleways, how that's been invested, where the gaps are, where the issues are with the delivery of projects, some of the activities that have been undertaken, and the direct consequence that has had in terms of cycleway participation across our city. And I think those governance questions are central to the new cycleways plan, and I think that's the rightful way to go about that. And I say that as someone, or I say that as the chair of the cycleways committee and have been since 2017. That committee's role in terms of working through those governance questions has not been, I don't think that's been very appropriately executed. I think that committee has been a lot of the time in the detail of the technical delivery of cycleways and not enough time in the broader questions which this plan addresses is how do we deliver a cycleway strategy across the city? How do we prioritise those areas that need investment? And how are we assuring accountability in terms of resources, expenditure, kilometres of separated cycleway delivered, and most importantly, participation. I think the other things that are very critical about this plan is that they systematically go through what are the barriers to the adoption of cycling or the take-up of cycling as a transport mode, and systematically go through those barriers and look at measures that can be implemented. Safety obviously being primary, the importance of safe separated cycleways, the number one priority of delivering effective, allowing people to participate, but also things like wayfinding, things like drinking fountains, you know, the availability of tools and resources and bike parking. All of these things are addressed, as well as community education and outreach. And I think, well, perhaps if I can refer to one aspect of the plan which for me underlines the priority of cycleways, it's the recognition in this plan that each individual cycling trip means less pressure on our roads, less congestion, less pressure on our parking, and we've heard about the implications of that just previously. It means better air quality, it means better health. Every individual trip delivers those multiple benefits to our community, and I think that's the priority, identifying what are those impediments, and as this plan does, work systematically through addressing those. So I'm very happy to support it. I'm very pleased to see it come to fruition, and I look forward to the support of the councillors in the chamber. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Would the seconder like to speak to the motion? Are there any other speakers? Councillor Church?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, for your comments. I think you're one of the few people in this chamber who actually put their money where their mouth is. The cycling councillor, I'd call you. Oh, and Councillor White also. Terrific to see Ward 1 councillors using the flat and picturesque area of our city. Most people use their cycles in this area for recreation, not for coming to work, but I think a parking plan like this is a good first step to try and change those numbers.
Oh, you mean a
cycling plan? I'm sorry. My apologies. Thank you. There's a lot of plans on the agenda tonight, Lord Mayor.
Or just parking's on your mind?
It's always on my mind, and it's on the mind of, it's the barbecue stopper, Lord Mayor. It used to be banks and now it's parking. But
Jeez, that's a fun barbecue.
I'd like to reiterate my thanks to the team for the amount of work done in bringing this cycling plan to fruition. And I'm also happy to support this plan tonight. I think I agree with Councillor Mackenzie. We need to create a network of interconnected cycleways that are safe and convenient. And there are a few missing links which this addresses. And I think we were talking about that in 2017 during the last local government election campaign. It's good to see this come to fruition tonight. My concern, however, is whether we're going to commit to actually funding the projects identified in this plan. Last month, I highlighted that this council has spent almost $6 million less than it budgeted on cycleways over a 5-year period. Between 2015 and 16 and 2019-20, the council and community approved budget called for $12.68 million to be spent on cycleways. Instead, we actually spent $6.95. Forward to this financial year, and our capital works budget has allocated a healthy $4.95 million for cycleways, but reveals that up until December, we'd spent just 10% of that, around $490,000. Further, the works summary notes that an additional $780,000 is to be taken out of the planned expenditure on cycleways this financial year. As the Newcastle Cycleways movement said when quoted in the Newcastle Herald on January 16, we can't cycle on a report. We actually need to see the elements put in the ground, and I could not have put it better myself. I'm happy to support this, but I think we need to fund it at the same time.
Are there any further speakers? If there are no other speakers, I think it's really important that when our budget is presented to us in the coming months via the staff, that the only way to fund the projects is to support the delivery program and the budget. And I note that is not supported by all councillors quite regularly for all a manner of different reasons. So it's pretty impossible to promise the delivery of cycleways and then not support any funding for them. Any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, Councillor Mackenzie, would you like your right of reply?
Just briefly, Lord Mayor, I'd like to refer to the implementation plan in particular, which, as I alluded to, is one of the key aspects of the delivery of this plan. It outlines quite specifically how this plan will be delivered with timelines and responsibilities. And I note with some pleasure that a lot of the roles allocated to priority actions are for City of Newcastle. We're not depending on other agencies for the delivery of these, which is good. But I would just refer to Councillor Church to the monitoring and evaluation plan at the end of that implementation plan, which includes the annual presentation of a report covering budget, covering expenditure, covering activities, demonstrating where the money has been spent, how it's been spent and how it's delivered, and some of the issues in relation to delivery. I've spoken in many instances here with information probably not all councils are privy to about some of the impediments to the delivery of cycleways programs, how we're able to actually leverage funding for other public domain works to actually fund cycleways projects. Some of the ways in which we've been dependent on state government involvement to deliver cycleways improvements, which mean that on occasion we do not meet those budgets, the budgets allocated and the budgets that this council has committed to cycleways. But I think an annual plan which demonstrates how cycleways have been delivered and what are the impediments will actually ease the minds of the community and Councillor Church in particular in terms of how we are delivering the cycleway strategy. So that in and of itself is an improvement in governance, but overall these governance improvements will make sure that we are actually delivering a fairly modest goal actually of a 4% total journey to work cycleway participation, which as Councillor Church points out, that's a rise from the current 1.9% cycle to work participation. So a very modest goal by 2030, very able to be delivered by the plan, by the activities outlined in the plan. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, as there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. We're up to item 9, public exhibition of the draft economic development strategy. Moved Councillor Clausen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased to move that we put out the economic development strategy on public exhibition, so the officer's recommendation. In doing so, I just want to particularly acknowledge the amount of work that has been put into this strategy by our council officers. It's a fairly robust document. The series of attachments are well worth reading through, particularly the consultation summary in terms of the number of events and discussions that have taken place in the development of this strategy. There were some 900 visits to the Have Your Say website, 12 sessions held with more than 200 attendees. I was lucky enough to attend the session hosted with Hunter Young professionals, and it was a really engaging conversation about some of the economic challenges that do face our city. The report doesn't shy away from the fact that last year particularly really did set the stage for just how tough it can be for a regional city like Newcastle during a global pandemic. And I particularly note paragraph 10 in the officer's report that refers to the fact that unemployment peaked at 11% compared with 4% prior to the pandemic. Unemployment was still 7% in the city of Newcastle in December of last year. And the particular issue that for youth and youth unemployment, and it notes that at various stages during the pandemic, almost 30% of young people were unemployed. You also, when considering that statistic, it's important to recognise the non-participation rate of young people, which means that as a combined total, 50%, half of young people in our region weren't in the workforce. So it's really alarming and concerning statistic. We've got a motion coming up later this evening to talk about job seeker, and so there'll be an opportunity to talk about those particular economic ramifications in a little while. The economic development strategy, though, is somewhat transformative in the way that it's been set and placing local government as a key driver of economic development. The principles behind this strategy are about people-centred and place-based approaches with a view that the local economy is built on local talent, skills, and the innovation of our local people. It talks about skills in innovation, creativity, and that they're the foundations for new jobs and investment to improve the conditions of people in the city of Newcastle. The plan is very much predicated on creating opportunities for all in the 2020s, which is also fairly significant. So I really appreciate the volume of work that's been put in, this place-based approach that the staff have adopted in the development of this economic development strategy, and the enormous amount of consultation that's been undertaken at the front end in terms of the development of this document. I know that it has been well received, and I look forward to the further submissions that we'll receive as a result of the public consultation.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thanks to the staff for their extensive work in preparing this strategy. I agree that a focus on people and their skills and training should be a key element of any business development strategy, so well done. Making Newcastle a great place to work and live will attract clever people and reverse the old brain drain to Sydney and other capital cities of the past. I am concerned, however, about the idea of moving away from a business attraction strategy. People need jobs, and thriving, profitable businesses help to create those jobs. Attracting new businesses to the city should be one of the many tools available to promote economic development. Earlier this evening, we supported a Lord Mayoral Minute, which suggested exactly that we should be talking to organisations like BusTech as a business attraction strategy, that they might come and bring with them skilled people, new business opportunities and long-term maintenance contracts. What a terrific idea. I note that Newcastle Airport, 50% owned by this council, is an example of a company focused on business attraction. Their idea and their plan is to attract as many airlines as possible, delivering routes and passengers through the airport terminal. And then they're focused on attracting businesses which will then invest in land surrounding the airport, creating defence and aviation-related jobs. These businesses will in turn then attract skilled people to our region, and so it works together. I support the idea of a people-centred approach, but I think we should also equally have a business attraction approach included in our plan. I'm happy to support placing it on public exhibition. I note these things so the public might have some comments, both from the business and the wider community.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? Would you like a right of reply, Councillor?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I appreciate Councillor Church's comments, and this is one of those things where actually turning up and engaging in the conversation is really handy. We talked about this strategy at length at the council strategy weekend. It was disappointing that none of the Newcastle Independents councillors chose to attend, and I think that it's reflected in, with the exception of Councillor Ruffo, my apologies.
I uphold that. You were definitely there because I definitely talked to you, and I think I sat next to you for quite some.
My apologies, Councillor Ruffo. I was going to say that you were a great member of the team where we talked about this particular issue, but three of Councillor Ruffo's colleagues didn't attend. We talked at some length about the various opportunities that exist in the economic development space and the role of different players, especially the Department of Regional New South Wales would have a clear role to play, the New South Wales Government, the federal government, other agencies, the Committee for Hunter, Newcastle Airport, and the like. The role of local government, though, is really about supporting and bringing together and ensuring that we have a talented group of people in order to support businesses. Nobody questions the role of business in terms of job creation, but the research shows that there is a substantially greater return when you invest in local businesses and create new opportunities for our businesses. That's what this strategy aims to achieve. I've sat in a number of roundtable discussions with representatives from the Hunter Business Chamber who have identified they're very supportive of the approach that councils are taking. So I think that we have adopted the right strategy. The approach that we're taking is sensible, and particularly in the context of the global pandemic that we're receiving. So I'm very pleased with the report that's before us.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, as there are no votes against, I declare the motion carried unanimously. Councillors, we're up to item 10, public exhibition of the draft grants policy and sponsorship policy. Do I have a mover of that motion? Councillor Duncan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie? Councillor Duncan.
Lord Mayor, thank you. I'm very happy to move the officer's recommendation. However, I'd like to move this with just one amendment, please, and that being that we increase the maximum amount under arts, culture and heritage to a maximum of $50,000 for professional arts and cultural organisations. This will ensure that we are able to capture and support great organisations like Catapult Dance, who have over the last 10 days, of course, been a stunning component of the new annual festival, but also significant hosts of international professional dance exchange and education programs. That's on page 49, part C. One of the wonderful opportunities that I've had since being elected a councillor of this city has been the experience of being involved with reviewing community and cultural grants. And one of my observations from that is how very difficult and complex it can be at times for individuals and organisations who do not have experience or support in applying for or writing grant applications to actually come up with a positive result of support. And I think if we look at some of the ideas that are afforded to us by members of our community, whether as individuals or in groups and organisations, there are some incredible contributions that can be truly made to the city in arts and placemaking, environmental and heritage. So this aims to actually enable it to happen far more efficiently. So to make this easier is to be commended. These drafts respond to these concerns and will provide vastly better outcomes for the community and for organisational efficiency. And I certainly recommend support of this, but I would note and request support of that single amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Are you happy to support that change to go out in public exhibition? Is there any discussion, councillors? Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I think you're exactly right. It's also been some of my most enjoyable experiences in my time on council has been assessing grants and being able to put money towards organisations and artists in our city. And I think the consequence of that was evident in the past 2 weeks of the new annual festival, which we've talked about. In particular, one of my concerns with this project, the changes to the grants policy initially was the removal of the funding for cultural and arts organisations. Which has been now sort of merged with the community support grants in general. I think that particular grant program, and I was very pleased to be part of the consideration of that because it was specifically designed to elevate key organisations within our city that were delivering professional arts programs so that they were skilled up and able to more sustainably source and access funding, particularly from Create New South Wales and other sources, but also to work towards a financial sustainability that enabled them to continue to produce their artworks in the city. And the organisations that we were able to fund through that program, Catapult Dance, Tantrum Theatre, Octopod, many of the organisations that actually featured in the new annual, and I think that demonstrates just how significant and how successful that particular program was. I think the amendment, and I'm grateful for the changes that have been made in response to the concerns raised, to include this opportunity for what's called professional arts and cultural organisations to access $50,000 in funds, I think will go a long way to address the removal of that grant program. And I think we've wound up with something, although the quantum of funding is not as high as it was under that original grant, it won't be tied to some of the same impediments that the professional arts and cultural organisations grant funding was. In particular, some of the programming requirements and some of the need for the organisations to make use of council's facilities, which in some instances was very good and very part of that development and professional building of those organisations, and in some cases was an impediment. Overall, I think the process of rationalising, of making the delivery and application process more straightforward and more supported by council, I think will only deliver better outcomes. And I'm very much looking forward to the response of the community to make sure that we have this very critical part of our organisation's business correct and aligned to not just the strategic goals of this organisation, but also the economic development plan of the city as well, so that all of the parts of our organisation are working together to deliver those goals in tandem. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further discussion? So is there any further discussion? Pardon me. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Good work to the staff who have worked hard to produce this policy. A key question, of course, is who finally approves and grants sponsorship expenditure. I understand this plan, as it stands, puts all of the decision-making power in the hands of a council director. The director, I quote, at their discretion will determine the amount of CGP monies to be made available, and further, the policy authorises the director to approve grants on behalf of the elected council. So even though in some instances an assessment panel will be used to review the applications, it will consist of up to 4 staff members and the Lord Mayor or delegate. That means very limited community input, 0 input from elected councillors other than the Lord Mayor, and I find it very difficult to support under that framework. I believe we shouldn't be putting distance between these kinds of decisions and this elected chamber.
It's my understanding, and I might ask through you, that the chairs of the committees were involved in that process?
Lord Mayor, I'd have to take that question on notice or refer it to the Director of Strategy Engagement if he prefers.
Sorry, I haven't used this before. Lord Mayor, could stand up. I'm sorry, thank you. Could you clarify which committees you're referring to, please? Or chairs you're referring to, please?
It is the committees in the draft grants and sponsorship policy. There's several different committees. There's some for recreation grants, there's some for arts and cultural grants. It's my understanding that dependent on the type of grant, the committee chair that aligns was involved in the selection process.
Correct, yes.
That's my understanding, right. So that the statement from Councillor Church is incorrect. The committee chairs are actually involved in the selection process.
Lord Mayor, just to clarify, the final decision clearly sets with the director, not with the elected chamber. That's made clear in all of the policy documents that are before us here tonight.
It's going out for public exhibition, and maybe that is some feedback that needs to be taken on, because it's my understanding that the committee chairs, for example, Community and Culture or Economic Development, the Innovation Committee, where they were commensurately responsible, also the environmental grants, and also the placemaking that sits in terms of livable cities and planning. The committee chairs, the councillors, were involved in that process. So that might need some refinement during the public exhibition, just to ensure that level of governance, and I think that's appropriate. Are there any other speakers? Would you like your right of reply, Councillor Duncan? Councillor Ruffo, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just crossed my mind when you were talking that it would be, due to governance, it'd be ideal for that for that area to be questioned. Would it be prudent to actually make changes to the document before it goes out?
Look, I think a lot of that is actually covered in different parts of the documents that are in the attachments around that governance framework. It might just mean a tweak in the wording that the decision sits with the panel. But what I think is the intent of the document is, that has confused Councillor Church, is that the execution of the grant sits with the director. So for grants to be executed and acquitted, someone in council has to be responsible and receive the acquittal reports and also approve the funding. And that does actually need to sit with the director to do that. So Councillor Church might just need clarification in the document, or Councillor Church might need it explained to him, that process. But either way, that I think can be sorted out during public exhibition before the final comes back to us. Would you?
Lord Mayor, just for Councillor Ruffo's sake, you're exactly right, Lord Mayor. That's exactly what's proposed. If the language is dare I say clumsy, then we'll correct that while it's on public exhibition. It is effectively exactly the same as Councillor Ruffo. You're on the Citizen of the Year committee, like we used to call the Australia Day panel. You're well aware that the panel makes a decision, but someone ultimately has to have the delegated responsibility to execute that. That is me in that case. In the case of these grants, that is the Director of Strategy Engagement.
If there's no right of reply, Councillor, I'll put the motion that this goes out on public exhibition. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. Councillors, we're up to item 12, Liquor Amendment Bill 2020 update. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Duncan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Winnie Barts. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor?
Lord Mayor, yes, thank you. Apologies, I'm just forwarding my amendment to Councillor Services. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation and note that late last year the state government passed significant changes to the Liquor Amendment Bill. These amendments are significant. They were numerous, and watching that process in the state parliament last year, late last year, was interesting. These amendments are significant and positive for Newcastle's live music industry, for our nighttime economy, and also for associated industries and employers, as well as for our community. It is incredibly important that we know and we understand these changes, what they mean, and that we also know and understand and can explore the opportunities that are now afforded to Newcastle. We also spoke at the recent strategic planning workshop about the significant economic and cultural benefit to the city and the region of a growing, thriving cultural precinct and after-dark economy. These things can and should work beautifully hand in hand, and our recent new annual event speaks volumes to our potential. Council has requested the recent briefing by representatives of the Live Music Office and Liquor and Gaming New South Wales, and I commend that we received the update report on the Liquor Amendment Act 2020 as per Attachment A. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? Would you like to speak as seconder, Councillor? If there are no other speakers, would you like a right of reply? Oh, Councillor Church, busy night.
Lord Mayor, it is a busy night. Thank you. Good to see councillors working hard across the chamber. The issue here is that I'm getting a lot of feedback, negative feedback from the community. There's a great deal of unrest about our attempts to tinker with liquor trading laws, particularly small bar trials that suddenly become a precursor to even wider changes to alcohol trading in the city. Most of us in this chamber, in fact, I believe unanimously support a nighttime economy, but suddenly that has become not just a debate about things to see and do and safety in the city at night and activities and culture, but it's also become code for changes to liquor trading. I just want to place it on the record. There's a lot of negative feedback from the medical community, the frontline emergency workers that are talking to me. There are local residents in many areas that are expressing concerns about these amendments that may work for Sydney but may not work for Newcastle. There's deep concerns that this is just a slippery slope to reversing the Newcastle solution, which has served the city so well for 13 years. There is a focus on the police and their key comments, both in the public and privately, calling any changes to our liquor laws as lunacy. I think it needs to be placed on record, and we shouldn't simply just be adopting this automatically, but take on board this feedback.
Thank you, Councillor. Would you like a right of reply, Councillor Duncan?
Lord Mayor, yes, just very briefly, I think it's really important that as we continue to have discussions around these sorts of issues, particularly that affect a nighttime economy and industries associated with that, that we don't allow continued obsession with the mention of alcohol to actually prevent us from doing significant cultural improvement and economic improvement for the city. That we seem to somehow get bogged down in the alcohol narrative around anything that happens after 5 o'clock of an afternoon in this city does us a massive disservice and is, in fact, I think, really awful. I think it has the impact to perpetuate the dirty old stereotypes of this city when we have spent 15 or 20 years now working really hard with the community, with the police, with the authorities to allow this city to grow up. We are now the 7th largest city, bless you CEO, we are now the 7th largest city in this country, and we do need to grow up. We do need to encourage our community to learn and to understand things like these amendments. As I said, for us to actually understand what this means is absolutely critical. But our future in being a big, 7th largest city in Australia, sophisticated city and economically diverse city, culturally diverse city, really hinges on the fact that we understand that there is so much more to the city and what happens after 5 o'clock at night than alcohol. And I, for one, really do want to continue to work on changing that really destructive narrative.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put the motion, although...
Oh, were you closing the debate? Oh, sorry.
I called... I
know. I was only going to make a couple of words, but
Well,
Give me a bit of
Councillor, how about...
give me a bit of flexibility.
I can give you flexibility. What about this? If you talk about it in general terms, because I think the next item is about their whole budget, because you can talk about anything in the budget.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I'll come to you first. In closing the discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise a hand. All those against? Okay, all those in favour, please stand.
Lord Mayor, sorry.
Okay.
It just struck me now, whilst I should have, in this item here, I have a significant but non-pecuniary conflict of interest,
okay.
as I have family that own businesses or bars within the Newcastle area. And it didn't hit my mind until we started talking about it. So I can leave now and not be
Okay.
involved in the vote. I'm sorry, Lord Mayor.
All right, that's fine. Just pop out for a second and we'll take the... That's okay. I think you were injured at the start, so you didn't realise. No, that's fine. We'll do it quickly because it's not good for him to be walking around. It doesn't seem like it is anyway. The debate's closed, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Luke, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Winnie Bartz, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. All those against, please stand. Councillor Church. Declare the motion carried. Councillors, we're up to item 13, December quarterly budget review. No problem. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Clausen, do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Councillor Luke?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. What I was going to say with that previous item was just, we have to remember that what we're actually doing was receiving a report on the updated Act. And I think sometimes we forget what we're actually receiving sometimes. But I'm going to add to that, I think there's a couple, it's a very complicated issue. And I can remember when I was young and, I tell people, I can remember, we went from out all night to straight to Lambton Pool teaching people to scuba dive. I certainly couldn't do that today, but...
My favourite time at council meetings is story time with Councillor Luke.
But
this is like the time about your favourite park at Westfield. This is better.
The point I want to make, though, is that what's been happening over the last few years has had a big impact. And I think many of you know, my older kids, when that was coming in was the time they were beginning to drink. And it was a concern. What was happening in Newcastle was a major, major concern, that if your kids are out and the sort of things that was occurring. So it's important we do keep that into account. It's not a matter of one being right or one being wrong. An economic benefit, and I'm always for economic benefits, but an economic benefit does not automatically mean a social benefit, but it doesn't automatically mean a social disadvantage. I just think it's something we've got to keep into account. And we've got to actually bear in mind sometimes when we talk about Newcastle being an international city, Australia has a very different drinking culture to other places. If you go to Europe and go to France, a drinking culture over there where you'll take your children to a restaurant and they'll be served a bottle of wine at the age of a glass of wine with lunch at the age of 13, and that is a normal culture over there. But you wouldn't do that in Australia. It's very different. We have a different culture to many other parts of the world, and I think it's really important. We think this is far more complicated than small issues. But my main point supporting that is that it's receiving a report. I'm not really certain of what the best answers going forward yet are on the Newcastle solution, but we're really just receiving a report. Thanks for the flexibility, Lord Mayor.
Anytime. Councillors, would anyone like to speak also to the December quarterly budget review, which does include components of budgetary expenditure on staff time on that matter? Councillor Church.
Very briefly, Lord Mayor, I'd just like to note the capital works part of our quarterly budget review, noting the total budget is 116 million, spent to December 28 million. and it would appear we have a lot of catching up to do to meet the ambitious target. I hope it's only a timing issue, and I hope we're able to achieve that ambitious target, but right now we seem to be falling way behind.
Certainly, Councillor. Yeah, I note the December quarterly review, and I just take this opportunity to thank staff, particularly in regards to our works program, Director Liddell and his infrastructure team that are busily delivering what is a very ambitious target at $116 million works program. It was, as councillors remember, around the $84 million mark. And we made some very prudent decisions, I believe, last year during the height of the COVID response here in Australia and in New South Wales to increase our budget for infrastructure works by around $30 million to deliberately stimulate the local economy and create up to 700 local jobs. I think that is hugely ambitious and another stretch target on our staff. And I note that we have had a briefing just last week around the delivering timings, which is the same year in, year out. And I note that councillors that ask these questions in public meetings don't stay for those briefings by staff that actually go into this detail. And there would be a number of reasons for that. One would be to grandstand. One would be for, I don't know why you'd want to give staff a hard time in a public arena, but that also occurs. So I just want to put on the public record, again, my appreciation and my thanks, because there's a lot of people working really hard at councils, really long hours to deliver a really ambitious works program this year that's delivering noticeable change within the city. Did you want to add anything, CEO?
Sure, thank you, Lord Mayor. Council, I'd let you know that we do this year, as we do every year, and that is the halfway point of the year, we undertake a detailed review of the capital works program. It's worth noting that this year we have actually spent more, considerably more than we did just 2 years ago at the same point in time. And in that year, we delivered a record works program of $92.5 million. So I think it's fair to say, based on our performance just 2 years ago, councillors should be very confident that we will again deliver a record works program, recognising that latent conditions, weather and even lockdowns are all out of our control. It's also worth noting that there are many millions of dollars of delivered work that are not captured in the financial report, and that is simply on the basis that we're yet to receive invoices for the payment of those works. So obviously the Australian accounting standards preclude us from paying for work that we haven't actually been invoiced for, but there's work certainly that's been completed at Honeysuckle, at Qatar and others. Millions of dollars of work that has been completed, and for reasons that frankly leave me scratching my head, various organisations are yet to actually send us the invoice. So we'll pay for those works, and they'll be captured in the updated monthly financial statements once those invoices are actually received and paid for. And the last thing to note also is that there's also many millions of dollars in the procurement of fleet, which has to come from Europe and is, I'm advised, about 4 months behind schedule. Nothing we can do about that. You're all well aware there's a pandemic, that Europe has been in and out of lockdowns, and that is having a very significant ability on indeed Australia's ability to procure fleet. So there's not much we can do about the procurement of fleet, but in terms of delivering yet another year of record works program, I remain very confident of us being able to deliver for this city and council.
Thank you, CEO. I'll again reiterate, if councillors want some more detail on those questions, we had a workshop on it last week where the majority of councillors stayed and participated in that workshop to get a deeper understanding of the council financials. It's not fair to staff to ask some questions like that without notice at an ordinary council meeting. It's not been the done practice of my almost 13 years on council. It was also very obvious to anyone that does follow council that there is a majority of councillors that have supported the delivery of a budget for the last 3 years and now into the 4th year of this council term. So every single park, every single paycheck to a council contractor or a council staff member, the digital library, the room we're sitting in, is only supported by that budget. So it's very clear when that budget is not supported by councillors like Councillor Church that there can be no credit taken for any single works, whether it's a parking spot or a cycleway in the city of Newcastle. Let's just be clear about that. Is there any further discussion, councillors? Would you like a right of reply, Councillor Clausen? I'll put the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise their hand. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Luke, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Winnie Bartz, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. All those against, please stand. Councillor Church, Councillor Rufo. Councillors, we are up to item 14, 6 monthly performance report on the 2018-2022 delivery program. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Duncan, do I have a seconder? Councillor Clausen, would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor?
I would, indeed. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very happy to move the officer's recommendation to receive the 6 monthly performance report on the delivery program, and I can't wait to hear about those other millions of dollars, CEO. But first, let's consider that this report covers half a year of the fear and uncertainty brought to us by a global pandemic. And again, I very clearly want to state my gratitude and pride in our leadership team and all staff who continued to deliver services to our community without batting an eyelid. Or at least I think I could safely suggest that to our community, it appeared that way, although I'm sure the duck was very calm on the surface, underneath it was doing these things. I'm very proud to be one of the councillors on this side of the chamber that voted for this budget, which is delivering such significant and valuable improvement right across the city, and you can see it. You can see it every day. While we see in the report many numbers are down, for example, visitors, tickets, sales, etc., other significant economic drivers for the city have been sustained or improved. For example, there has been a $48 million increase in DAs approved compared to the same time last year, and 121 additional DAs approved. That's hard work. Staff, thank you. But we have the first leg of the city centre to Merriweather Cycleway now underway. A huge redevelopment of the number 1 sports ground is underway. And Lord Mayor, you know how much I love my sport. Local centre upgrades, including Llewellyn Street, Merriweather, have continued. And we now have a new and highly developed emergency operations centre right here in this building. This is something that I know I bang on about, but it is something that's very close to my heart, having worked as a broadcaster during several emergencies that have hit this city and in other locations throughout New South Wales. The smaller but essential items like footpaths, mobility upgrades, but yes, number 1 sports ground sings to me every time I go past there. I hope that people do take the time to look through the report. I know we get presented lots of reports. I know the public get presented with lots of reports as well. But to actually have a look through it and maybe look at how it affects a neighbourhood near you, a location near you. I certainly feel very proud to see our local community is so deeply reflected in the contents and the work that the city does every single day. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Are there any other speakers? Councillor White.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Probably following on a bit of the theme for tonight around, I guess, our cultural institutions. There were some interesting figures in the report that talks about for the library that for the relative period that we're looking at, that they had 157,551 visits, which was only down by 6,371. So, you know, our libraries are very valued by our community. You can see straight up from the Civic Theatre that their tickets were, you know, down from 70,000 to just on 18,000. So, you know, the events like our new annual, the cinema, everything that the staff have done to try and reinvigorate and reinvent the ways that we use the Civic Theatre is so important to make sure that we're able to bring people back in and get those ticket sales back up to where they were and hopefully even more. You know, the art gallery went from 23.5 to sort of, you know, around the 18,000. The museum is at about 18,000 from about 37. So you can they were at 37, which is down by about 18,000. But again, our library still managed to deliver 551 digital inclusion help sessions. There are 171 engagements with identified groups at the museum. There were 35 education programs held with young people at the art gallery and 88 education programs held with people living in regional New South Wales at the art gallery. So our cultural institutions play a very important role. And it's good that we've been able to, through a lot of our budgetary measures, to be able to assist them and to make sure that we've been able to use and utilise them as much as we can, and obviously be able to rebuild going forward when we hopefully get back to whatever that post-COVID normal might be.
Thank you, Councillor. Excellent points. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I would just like to again thank the staff through you, CEO. It's a very comprehensive 6-monthly update. Because we do get so much information at this council and monthly financial reports that often, and also our monthly infrastructure delivery program that's emailed to us on the 1st of every month from Ken and his team, we do get a lot of information about how everything's tracking quite regularly. So sometimes you can take this statutory reporting on a 6-monthly basis for granted, but it is good because every organisation needs to test its plan against its actuals, and they're not always the same. Global pandemics happen, supply chains are interrupted, and sometimes you need to change track. Not everything is set for 12 months. But what I wanted to say, and I make this point continually, the previous document about our December quarterly budget review is about items that we are adding into our budget that weren't originally planned for in our budget. So I think it's worth noting that items that were brought to council with Ward 3 councillors like Love Lambton were in that last item. So funding for the Love Lambton Festival has to then be put into a budget process based on the notice of motion to council from the Ward 3 councillors. But Councillor Rufo, you voted against that item. So to deliver that festival has to rely on supply from this side of the chamber. We cannot have it both ways. Like, if everything is just oppositional politics for the sake of being oppositional to everything, that is not actually the role of a councillor. We're all duly elected. We're one body politic. It's not a parliamentary system. And I just wanted to reiterate that point because we're going into an election year, and I'm sure that there will be bits of misinformation and bits of fear created. But at the end of the day, we're here to all deliver for our community. And the way we do that is through our operational plan and our delivery program, which is our annual budget. And I just wanted to thank the staff for this 6-monthly update. And even though it doesn't feel like it, living in Australia, New South Wales and in Newcastle, we're still in the midst of a global pandemic. When this budget was enacted on the 1st of July, it was, as Councillor Duncan and Councillor White articulated, an exceptionally difficult operating environment for all our staff. And they have shone through like no other local government I know. And I think that we should take the opportunity to celebrate our staff at council meetings, the amount of work they put in to not just doing their jobs, but going above and beyond for our community. So I want to thank the councillors that have spoken positively to this performance report on our delivery program, but also again thank the councillors that have voted for our December quarterly budget review. Because if you don't have supply, you don't have any programs, you don't have anything happening in the city of Newcastle. Would you like your right of reply, councillor? Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, as there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. Councillors, we've already dealt with the Executive Monthly Performance Report. So item 16, Audit and Risk Committee, 1920 Annual Report. Do I have a mover? Councillor Byrne. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thanks.
Lord Mayor, I ask this council to accept the Risk and Audit Committee's Annual Report 1920. It's worth noting that as a council we employ 1,300 employees, give or take half a dozen. We have an assets portfolio of $1.9 billion. So internal audit as a function of council is absolutely critical to mitigate against risk and to ensure that appropriate controls are in place. The role of the Risk and Audit Committee then is that it provides oversight for City of Newcastle's internal audit functions. And you only have to trek 40 minutes down the F3 to see what happens when appropriate risk controls aren't put in place. Central Coast Council had some hideous problems to the extent, I think, north of $200 million. So it's appropriate that we do have this type of oversight. The Risk and Audit Committee is chaired by Mr Stephen Coates, and most of you here will remember Mr Coates made a presentation to Council a couple of weeks ago, and it was noteworthy that Mr Coates was particularly impressed by City of Newcastle's risk management strategies. There's two other independent members on the committee, and collectively, I think they do bring a high level of confidence to council and certainly reassurance to me as a councillor. I'd note, obviously, in the recommendations, there's also a recommendation in Appendix A of the annual report, which highlights the internal audit's forward plans for 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
I acknowledge Councillor Mackenzie on the committee as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Byrne, and also Councillor Mackenzie for your work on that committee. It's very much appreciated. Are there any other speakers? Did you want to speak, Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm very, once again, very privileged to play a role in that Audit and Risk Committee alongside Councillor Byrne. I think it's fair to say that Councillor Byrne and I are, I don't want to say passengers, but certainly our participation is overshadowed by the experts, and we learn a lot more than what we actually probably impart. But I guess over the context, and in particularly in the last 12 months, we've seen extraordinary improvements, actually, in the way in which internal audits are done, and full credit to people who have implemented that, particularly from an internal audit perspective. We get excellent updates in terms of recommendations from internal and external report providers, progress, all delivered through our state-of-the-art CAM system, which honestly, the only shame really, and Councillor Byrne, you might say the same, the only shame is that other councils don't have visibility of the work that's done and how coordinated our internal risk program is. Certainly, it gives me a lot of confidence. I was very pleased that Mr Horn was able to give a presentation to council, because I worried that sometimes some of the discussions that are happening in that committee don't have the visibility of the other councillors, and they're critical discussions, particularly around things like fraud, cybersecurity, information management, business continuity, the long-term strategic and financial resilience of council. The other point that's worth making as well, one of the key improvements of that committee has been the coordination and the alignment with council's internal audit, governance and risk executive committee. There you go, GREC. And the fact that those two, there is key alignment between those two committees in terms of assessing risk and risk appetite within the organisation and making strategic interventions. So I'm very pleased with where the Audit and Risk Committee is up to. I think the points raised by Councillor Byrne in relation to the successful continuity, I think if there's places for that committee to improve, it will be in establishing a better connection with the elected council, to making sure the important work that's happening there has visibility and relevance to the work that we're doing. Because I think sometimes it sort of feels like, and certainly councillors, I'd invite you, if you have any questions about anything that's happening in that committee, please don't hesitate to ask, and make sure that you're across what we're discussing, because I think it only enriches the quality of the conversation that's happening in here, and the way in which the organisation handles those emergent risks in particular, but just the strategic vision of where we're heading overall. So full credit to the staff, and I mean this sincerely, full credit to the staff involved in those massive changes to the way that internal audits have been conducted. The proof is evident, and it reflects on the way in which our audit committee are frequently requested to make presentations on the innovations that are happening in this council, otherwise unnoticed. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much to both our councillor representatives. We do really appreciate your time and giving us a detailed report back, both either in a workshop in ordinary council on that committee. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, would you like your right of reply, Councillor Byrne?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. Our councillors, we're up to the partially confidential reports. Item 17, we have 2 items with a confidential attachment. If any councillors are wishing to discuss the confidential attachments, we'll need a motion to move into confidential session first. Then we will resolve to move back into open session to debate the item as per the normal meeting procedures. Do any councillors need to move into confidential session? If I'm not saying that is necessary, we'll just debate the item as per normal. So item 17, the tender report, geotechnical investigation and design panel contract, contract 2021/221T. Do I have a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Mackenzie, do I have a seconder? Councillor Church. Is there any discussion, councillors? If there's no discussion, all those in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. Item 18 is the supply of rock bags for Stockton, contract number 2021/160T. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor White. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. Is there any discussion, councillors? If there's no discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. CEO, can I get a report back to open council on those resolutions? Do I need them? You want me to do it at the end? I can do it now or at the end. Okay, I'll move on with the notice of motion, and I'll seek a report back on the outcomes of those 2 items then. The first notice of motion is permanently raise the rate. Just wait a moment for Councillor White. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Byrne, do I have a seconder? Councillor Clausen. Would you like to speak to the motion, councillor?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In moving this motion today, I was essentially blindsided by the Prime Minister, who had announced that there would be a permanent increase to the job seeker allowance, the quantum being $50 a fortnight. Of course, when I was drafting this notice of motion, I didn't anticipate that he would take that away from me.
Can I make a suggestion? He saw the printed papers go live last week at the City of Newcastle and thought, my goodness, I've got to act. Let's take that as an approach.
Disappointingly, that equates to $3.57 per day. The Hunter has depressingly high rates of youth unemployment. Councillor Clausen mentioned earlier in the draft economic strategy that's being released by Hunter, City of Newcastle, that youth unemployment reached the dizzy heights of 30% at the height of the pandemic. So, look, even if this notice of motion was amended at clause 9, I think it is, the weekly rates that would be adjusted, if you take into account that $50 a fortnight, would be a permanent raise to the job seeker allowance of between $160 and $250 per week. And I think it's worth drawing a bright line under the comments made by the RBA Governor, Philip Lowe, that the bulk of recipients spend every dollar they have of that job seeker allowance. So that's money that goes into the economy that helps local businesses. So the flow-on effect or the multiplier effect is measurable. Obviously, we've quoted the youth unemployment at 10%, but there's also this idea and notion of underemployed. People want work. Certainly, my job outside of here is with Hunter New England Health. We had an administration officer level 4, which is a middle rung administration officer position. There were 110 applicants for one position. These are predominantly young people who want employment. They can't get it. Obviously, we can't offer 110 people a job, but that was significant. So I would absolutely implore and commend this motion to the chamber tonight.
Thank you, councillor. Did I get a seconder? Councillor Clausen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Byrne. And couldn't agree with you more, Councillor Byrne. I don't think that the motion does need amending. The increase that we heard the federal government announce today to JobSeeker was embarrassing. $3.57 a day does not improve the livability of that payment at all. It still leaves tens of thousands of people just in Newcastle and the Greater Hunter literally living in poverty. That is what happens when you have a unemployment payment that is as low as the current JobSeeker payment is. It's substantially below any comparable OECD country. In fact, it's one of the less generous unemployment payments of anywhere in the world. And it's particularly important to reflect on some of the other measures that were announced today. For example, a new hotline that allows employers to dob in people that they think might be conducting welfare fraud. We've seen a continued attack on the unemployed and underemployed across this government. There were some members of the chamber that were proud to stand with the Liberal Party shirt on for election to the 2013 federal election, and we've seen the disastrous effects that's had for the country. I do want to particularly acknowledge the fact that the Prime Minister was in Newcastle only 2 weeks ago, reportedly attending a $10,000 a head fundraising dinner that was hosted by local property developers, who of course we know are prohibited developers at a state and local level, but somehow were able to host a function raising funds for the Prime Minister. A number of councillors, are led to believe, might have been in attendance at that particular fundraising event. A $10,000 dinner is 8 months of payment for somebody on the JobSeeker payment. 8 months of payment to attend a single dinner. There are thousands of Novocastrians that only rely on the JobSeeker payment, many more as a result of the COVID pandemic, some 50% increase in the number of recipients since March of last year. And that, of course, fails to take into account the number of Novocastrians that are still receiving other forms of coronavirus support. So the JobSeeker wage subsidy, for example, that you would expect there might be an adjustment in the labour market and those people might find themselves unemployed and moving to unemployment benefits when that payment also ends in March. It really is exceptionally disappointing. The most recent jobs availability snapshot that was undertaken by Anglicare identified that there are 106 job seekers for every single job vacancy. So 106 people competing for an entry-level job vacancy. There's this idea that people that receive unemployment are lazy or somehow undeserving. Well, that's nonsense. There just simply aren't enough jobs and economic opportunities, and keeping people in poverty doesn't assist them in being able to apply for new opportunities. The Councillor Byrne referenced the comments by the Reserve Bank Governor, and I think it's fair to say that it's fairly unusual actually for somebody that's tasked with looking after monetary policy in Australia to engage in conversations about equity and equality and the need to raise the rate. But it was encouraging to see his comments about the fact that JobSeeker needed to be permanently raised just from an equity benefit was echoed by comments from the Business Council of Australia, who reflected on that point that I was just making. Their submission to the federal government was about the fact that $40 a day isn't enough for people to buy clothes and be presentable to turn up to interviews, to have the basic skills that are necessary in order to be able to apply for jobs. And they said on that basis alone, JobSeeker needed to be permanently increased. Councillor Byrne, moving this motion this evening, also moved a motion of this council in September 2018, where we unanimously resolved to support the Newcastle Anti-Poverty Alliance's campaign to raise the rate, and this motion reaffirms that previous commitment. Lord Mayor, it's also worth recognising, and we've obviously had quite an extensive conversation about the budget this evening, that in moving this motion, we also need to recognise that local government has a responsibility, and we have acted on that responsibility to ensure that there are opportunities for locals. Our $116 million infrastructure works program we've been talking about tonight is expected to deliver 700 jobs and $275 million in economic output. We brought forward additional capital works, as you mentioned, in order to make sure that we could stimulate the local economy. So where are we at the moment? And just in closing, worth recognising that there are 10,500 Novocastrians that are currently on the JobSeeker benefit. That's a 50% increase prior to COVID. There are 106 job seekers for every single national vacancy. $80.5 million was paid into the Newcastle economy alone as a result of the coronavirus supplement since April of last year, and that is entirely been ripped out with the exception of $3.57 a day from the 1st of March. This is going to have a serious negative impact, and we need to take a firm stand as a council and advocate for a meaningful raise to the rate.
Thank you, councillors. Are there any other speakers? I don't want to cover what has already been covered, but I think if I use a more macroeconomic analysis an anecdote, sitting on the City Task Force and getting the real-time updates from Dr. Anthea Bill around two different data sources. One was the One Touch payroll data source, and one was a different data source she got through credit card spending. And often they weren't necessarily tracking the same to try and look sector by sector what was happening over those months since the lockdown. We first locked down in April last year, and trying to track what was going to be the economic impact from coronavirus and therefore the social flow-on effects. And obviously having JobKeeper and JobSeeker slushing around in the economy, even though people weren't at work or were partially working during that time, you actually saw predominantly the data showing, both in Australia, the lower income earners were actually keeping the economy going in this country and in this city. High income earners and wealthy were holding on to money during that time. And you've seen a quite disparate gap between those future economic prospects and outcomes between those lower socioeconomic groups and the more wealthy. The wealthy have got wealthier during the pandemic, and the poorer have got poorer, which is not a good outcome for our community. At the same time, as you know, I sit with a number of international mayors on a Bloomberg Mayors Institute that's auspiced by Harvard. And at the same time, we were getting real-time updates because of the pandemic, particularly from the Johns Hopkins Medical School, as well from Harvard at the same time. And they were analysing data city by city. And the data, for example, that they were snapshotting through New York around spending patterns was exactly the same. It was the low income earners that were keeping the economy going, and the high income earners were holding the money. So we absolutely know, and this goes to also Kevin Rudd's GFC response, that if you are putting money, as Councillor Byrne said, into the hands of the people that need it the most, they are spending it and keeping our local economies going. And I think that's not just an example here, but it's also been an example shown around, other OECD countries in the world that had some stimulus packages coming into them. Is there any other discussion? If there's no further discussion, Councillor Byrne, would you like a right of reply?
No, thanks, Lord Mayor.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, I declare the motion carried unanimously. Councillors, item 2, keeping the Newcastle ocean baths free. Oh, I just have to wait for Councillor White, sorry. Thank you, Ms Bisson. Councillor, we're just up to item 2, keeping the Newcastle ocean baths free. Do you have a mover of the motion? Councillor Duncan, do you have a seconder? Councillor Clausen, thanks. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Lord Mayor, yes, thank you. It wasn't until 1953 that you could go for a swim at Newcastle ocean baths for free, and it was only because the Labor councillors of the day fought so hard to change it that we are still able to enjoy the baths for free today. Merewether ocean baths have always been free, and I imagine always will be. So with this notice of motion, on the one hand, I'm very pleased to bring this to the chamber for discussion, but I was also a little bit frustrated that we even have to do this. However, the notice of motion states that council notes when the Newcastle ocean baths were first opened in 1918, an entry fee was charged. From 1922 to 1953, this fee was collected by a private operator. Notes that the Newcastle ocean baths were made free following a hard-fought campaign in 1953, led by Newcastle Labor councillors, with fierce opposition from Conservative councillors and some residents' groups. Reaffirms the council's current enduring commitment to maintaining the Newcastle ocean baths as a safe, free public facility accessible to all Novocastrians, regardless of socioeconomic status, gender, age, mobility or background. Notes that the design tender for stage 1, incorporating restoration of the pool and promenade, has been awarded, with construction expected to commence early in the new financial year following further community consultation. Stage 2, renewal of the pavilions and upper level public domain space, will occur following further consultation to ensure they meet the needs of all users. Notes that Council has reserved the $9.5 million proceeds from the sale of the Frederick Ash building as funding for the renewal of the baths, and continues to engage with a broad cross-section of the Newcastle community on upgrades of the Newcastle Ocean Baths while addressing misinformation that has been spread about this topic. And it is, I guess that is one of the issues that frustrates me so much, Lord Mayor. It actually astounds and disappoints me that we feel that this notice of motion is even necessary. That I should have to stand here tonight and state that Newcastle Ocean Baths have been free for the last 70 years, and we are going to recommit to ensuring that they're free for use potentially for the next 70 years and beyond, and ask councillors to support this notice of motion to recommit to keeping the free baths free is really quite curious. Anyway, this is where we find ourselves. Sadly, online gossip, Councillor Mackenzie, and fear-mongering sometimes become such that simply saying the rumour isn't true appears to be insufficient. So I put this motion to the council, and I would ask all councillors to support this commitment that the Newcastle Ocean Baths, which are free, will continue to remain free for our community to use and enjoy. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Would you like to speak as seconder? Are there any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just have a small amendment which I hope is acceptable to the mover and motion. Can we just include as part 3, reaffirms the current council's enduring commitment to maintaining the Newcastle Ocean Baths and Merryweather Baths as safe, free public facilities accessible to all Novocastrians regardless of socioeconomic status.
Would the mover and seconder like to accept that?
I'm happy to accept that, Lord Mayor, but once again, I reiterate, I find having to recommit to keeping free ocean baths free is bizarre.
Yes, I understand. Are the seconders happy?
I understand there's an election this year, but it's still bizarre.
Yes. I've been through a few of them, and the misinformation can take hold, particularly if it's issues. Fear and misinformation, unfortunately, in our day and age, can be a driver. And I think it's important that those points are clarified. I mean, Councillor Church Councillor Rufo, had raised an issue about the King Street car park, and that had to be clarified. So I think it's important that we do correct the fear and the misinformation, and make sure the public record is just that, public, and the baths are free and will remain free. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I'll put the motion. Oh, would you like a right of reply, Councillor?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
I'll put the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare that carried unanimously. Item 3, a Novocastrian in the White House. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Clausen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Winnie Bartz, thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Winnie Bartz. Lord Mayor, I'd like to move the notice of motion as printed. It's a fairly straightforward one, acknowledging a fairly special occasion, and that is perhaps for the first time ever, and possibly for the first time in at least the foreseeable future, we have a Novocastrian sitting in the White House, the most senior elected office, many would argue, in the world. The notice of motion notes that President Biden's political career began in Newcastle County, on the Newcastle County Council in Wilmington, Delaware in the United States. That both Newcastle, Australia, our city, and Newcastle, Delaware are both parts of the Newcastles of the World Friendship Group. That we congratulate the President and his Vice President, Kamala Harris, on their decisive actions of their new administration, including in combating COVID-19 and by returning the United States to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. I believe that actually took place 2 or 3 days ago. It was very recent that they're officially back in, and that's already been momentous in terms of the international action that we're seeing being taken on climate change. Point 5, and another particularly important note is that we've got 2 Novocastrians in Washington, with the Australian ambassador to the United States being His Excellency Arthur Sinodinos, a proud Novocastrian, and of course an informal ambassador for Newcastle, Australia, into Washington. And the final point is that we write to the US Embassy and the US Consul General, expressing the city's congratulations to the President and Vice President and seeking to maintain the strong relationship between the City of Newcastle and the United States of America.
Thank you, Councillor. Did I get a seconder for that motion? I did, Councillor Winnie Barts. Would you like to speak? Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I am very much in favour of that motion, and I did take the opportunity in catching up with our US consul, Sharon Hudson-Dean, on a number of occasions, one occasion last year and one occasion earlier this year, and last year before the election, to note that if there was a favourable outcome in November, that President Biden's career did start as a councillor on Newcastle Council in Delaware. So I think that's a nice synergy, and I think our local representative here in Sydney was quite interested to hear that fact and quite interested in that relationship with the Hunter region, particularly due to the JSF. If there are no other speakers, would you like a right of reply? I'll put the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Maybe by division. All those in favour, please stand. Councillor Church, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Winnie Barts, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor White, Councillor Nelms. All those against, please stand. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Rufo. I declare the motion carried. Councillors, the final notice of motion, item 4, PEP 11. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Clausen, do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne, thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And fortunately for Councillors Rufo and Mackenzie, returning safely to domestic policy. Hopefully that is more agreeable. Councillors, the motion before us is about PEP 11, the Petroleum Exploration Permit number 11, of course, which is a sizeable exploration area off the coast of Newcastle that extends all the way down to Sydney. We've had a number of conversations about it. Councillor Mackenzie has brought motions previously to the council, and we've got a fairly strong position. This motion specifically notes that PEP 11 actually expired on the 12th of February and currently continues in a holdover period while an extension is considered by the Joint Authority. The Joint Authority consists of the New South Wales Deputy Premier John Barilaro and the Commonwealth's Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia, the Honourable Keith Pitt. Under the way that the Joint Authority has previously operated, both the New South Wales Minister and the Commonwealth Minister's approvals required for an exploration permit to be acted upon. The point 4 of the motion notes that the Deputy Premier has already indicated his objection and confirmed that his government will not be issuing concurrence to an extension. The final point is that we write to Minister Pitt reiterating the city's strong opposition to the future extension of PEP 11 gas exploration licence and to offshore oil and gas mining off the coast of Newcastle. The federal minister has indicated that he is likely to make a decision fairly soon, but hasn't yet done so. It does mean that the current exploration continues in this holdover period. And as I said, it breaks with convention. The joint authority model is that both the federal minister and the state minister's approvals required. We already know the outcome of the state minister's approval, so it does seem somewhat unusual to me, to be honest, that it's still something that the federal minister is actively considering, where he might seek to override the powers of the state with respect to potentially extending or granting a new permit for offshore exploration off the coast of Newcastle. That would fly in the face of significant community opposition, not just here in Newcastle, but all the way down the east coast. And so I think the point of advocacy I'd like to make is that it would be brave of the Commonwealth Minister to override both the state government but also numerous local councils, hopefully including the City of Newcastle, potentially in allowing those offshore activities to continue. And the complication and the fact that the continued exploration may actually preclude some of the other opportunities that do exist off the coast of Newcastle that the City of Newcastle has previously supported.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I will put the motion. Would you like a right of reply? I think before you do, I think the last point is very valid. We had a very good discussion here in these chambers around the opportunities for significant billions of dollars worth investment regarding renewables and offshore wind. And while PEP 11 exists, that actually precludes that from ever going ahead. And I think that above all the other environmental concerns is also an ongoing concern in terms of the economic diversification and the potential jobs and job creation that those type of projects could have in the future of Newcastle and the Hunter region. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. That ends our ordinary agenda. There's just one item on a confidential report. Can I get a motion to move into confidential session as per the reasons stated in the business paper? Item 18, so that's the Geotechnical Investigation Design Panel, the supply of rock bags for Stockton, and also the confidential staffing matter.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Confidential item 17, that Council, 1, accept the tender of Cardno New South Wales ACT Proprietary Limited, RCA Australia Proprietary Limited, Douglas Partners Proprietary Limited, WSP Australia Proprietary Limited, and Coffee Services Australia Proprietary Limited for geotechnical investigation design services for contract number 2021/22-1T. The confidential attachments relating to the matters specified in Section 10A2D of the Local Government Act 1993 be treated as confidential and remain confidential until the Chief Executive Officer determines otherwise. Confidential item 18, that Council accept the tender of Bluemont Proprietary Limited in the amount of $666,000, excluding GST, for the supply and delivery of 90 rock emergency works at Stockton Beach for contract number 2021/060T. The confidential attachments relating to the matters specified in Section 10A2D of the Local Government Act 1993 be treated as confidential and remain confidential until the Chief Executive Officer determines otherwise. And confidential item 1, that Council establish the Newcastle Museum and Newcastle Art Gallery as service units in the organisational structure within the Citywide Services Directorate, attachment A. 2, endorse the creation of senior staff positions for the roles of Newcastle Museum Director and Newcastle Art Gallery Director in accordance with the executive band of the Local Government State Award 2020 and the total remuneration package as determined by the Statutory and Other Officers Remuneration Act 1975 sought for public service senior executives graded at band 1. 3, this confidential report relating to matters specified in Section 10A2 of the Local Government Act 1993 be treated as confidential and remain confidential until councillors are advised by the Chief Executive Officer that the structure and positions have been communicated to all staff within these affected teams.
Thank you, CEO. That concludes our ordinary agenda at 9:34 p.m. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening, councillors.